before kingdoms ruled the world, before writing empires or even history itself, one forgotten valley may have changed the future of humanity forever. Here, small bands of hunter-gatherers made a choice that would reshape civilization, settling down, building communities, and planting the first seeds of a new way of life. But why this valley, and what secrets still lie buried beneath its ancient soil? Stay with us as we uncover the incredible story of the ancient valley that raised the first settled humans. If you enjoy fascinating ancient history and forgotten civilizations, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and join us for more incredible journeys into humanity's distant past. The valley is quiet now, but it is not empty. Long before towers cast shadows across cities, before kings pressed seals into clay, before scribes learned to trap language in signs, this land already holds the shape of a future the people living here cannot yet see. It lies between highlands and desert, between river and escarpment, between green pockets of life and harsh open ground where the sun strips the colour from stone. Water gathers where it can. Springs rise from hidden chambers in the earth. Reeds tremble near pools. Wild grasses bend in the wind. Herds move through the open country following seasons older than memory. And somewhere in this landscape, small human groups begin to do something that will eventually alter the entire story of the species. They begin to return. They come back to the same slopes, the same water, the same stands of grain, the same burial places, the same stones warmed by morning light. They are not yet farmers in the full sense. They are not villagers in the later sense. But they are no longer simply passing through the world as their ancestors once did. Something in the valley is teaching them to stay. The place is the ancient Levant, and at its heart runs the long corridor of the Jordan Valley, a deep geological scar where Africa and Asia nearly touch through stone, river, marsh, and desert edge. It is not a single gentle garden. It is a restless landscape of contrasts. To one side rise limestone hills where winter rain can bring sudden green. To another lie drier margins where survival depends on knowledge as much as strength. The valley floor sits low in places far below sea level, collecting heat, water, salt, and life in unusual combinations. The Jordan River threads through it, and near the Dead Sea the world turns stark and mineral, while farther north springs and lakes create refuges where plants, animals, and people can gather. In deep time, this corridor has already served as a route for movement. Humans and earlier human relatives have passed through the broader region for hundreds of thousands of years. But at the end of the Ice Age, this old passageway begins to become something more than a road. It becomes a place of return, memory, experiment, and eventually settlement. Before we go deeper, take a moment to like the video and subscribe if this is the kind of history and mystery you enjoy. Because the mystery here is not the kind that depends on a vanished golden city or a forbidden temple buried beneath sand. It is quieter and in some ways more unsettling. It asks how ordinary people living with stone tools, baskets, fire dogs, and an intimate knowledge of the land crossed a threshold that no earlier generation had crossed in quite the same way. They did not know they were raising the first settled worlds. They did not know that houses, storage fields, walls, graves, feasts, inheritance, inequality, and eventually civilization itself would grow from decisions that may have seemed small in the moment. A family remains near a spring a little longer. A group returns to a patch of wild barley at the same season. A dead relative is buried close to the living place rather than left behind on the trail. A structure is repaired instead of abandoned. A store of seeds is guarded through lean months. None of these acts alone creates history. Together they begin to change what being human means. The valley's power comes partly from its position. It stands within the wider Fertile Crescent, the great arc of land stretching from the Levant through northern Mesopotamia and toward the Zagros Mountains. Later, this broad region will be associated with farming villages, domesticated plants and animals, and some of the earliest cities on Earth. But those later developments can obscure how uncertain the beginning really is. There is no single morning when wandering ends and settled life begins. The evidence remains incomplete, scattered through charcoal stone foundations, animal bones, seed impressions, grinding tools, burials, and the chemistry of ancient soils. Scholars still debate how much was caused by climate, how much by population pressure, how much by ritual, how much by abundance, and how much by crisis. The old phrase, agricultural revolution, can make the change sound sudden and inevitable, but what survives in the record suggests something slower, stranger, and more human. It is a long negotiation between people and place. For tens of thousands of years before this shift, humans are already intelligent, social, artistic, adaptable, and deeply familiar with their environments. Nothing about settlement means that earlier mobile people were primitive or aimless. Mobility is an achievement. To move well through a landscape requires maps held in memory, knowledge of plants in every season, skill in tracking animals, alliances across distance, and a way of carrying life lightly. For most of human existence, this is the normal way to live. Groups follow resources, avoid exhaustion of local supplies, and maintain social worlds that stretch across wide territories. They know where water hides after dry months. They know which slopes ripen first. They know how animals behave when wind shifts. They know the dangers of staying too long. A camp can become dirty, prey can move away, wood can grow scarce, quarrels can sharpen. Movement solves many problems, so when some communities begin to stay longer, or return so regularly that a place becomes almost a home, the change is not an obvious improvement. It is a gamble. The ancient valley makes that gamble tempting. Unlike wide-open steppe or deep desert, it offers many resources within reach of one another. Wetlands, riverbanks, oak, parklands, grasslands, rocky slopes and seasonal streams sit close enough that a group can draw from several worlds without travelling enormous distances. Wild cereals grow in dense stands in parts of the Levant. Nuts, fruits, legumes, tubers, birds, fish, small mammals, gazelle wild cattle, and other animals offer a varied menu across the year. The landscape does not provide everything equally or reliably, but it provides enough diversity to reward memory and planning. A family that understands these seasonal rhythms can return at the right moment and find food waiting on the stem in the shell under the ground or moving along a known path. Over generations, places with dependable water and nearby plant stands become more than useful. They become familiar. Familiarity becomes attachment. Attachment becomes one of the hidden roots of settlement. Yet the valley is not simply generous. It can be severe, and its severity matters. Rainfall changes sharply over short distances. A few hills can separate richer ground from hard country. Drought can shrink abundance. Cold periods can disturb plant zones. Rivers and springs can sustain life, but they also concentrate it, drawing humans, animals, insects, and competition into the same places. The deep Jordan Valley is a place of opportunity, because it is also a place of pressure. This is one reason it becomes so important. Human transformation often begins not in perfect comfort, but at edges where different environments meet, and survival requires flexibility. The valley is an edge repeated many times over wet and dry, high and low settled and mobile, wild and managed memory and experiment. The people who move through this world leave behind few words because they have no writing. Their voices are gone, and any attempt to imagine their inner lives must remain careful. Still, archaeology gives them weight. A grinding stone worn smooth by repeated use suggests hours of labour and a taste for seeds processed into meal. A hearth rebuilt in the same place suggests return. A burial near a living area suggests that the dead are not simply absent but somehow part of the place. A house foundation suggests planning beyond a night or two. A cache of tools suggests expectation. These traces do not speak easily, but they point in the same direction. Human life in the valley is becoming more anchored. The land is no longer only crossed, it is marked. This matters because settlement changes time. For mobile groups, the future often lies along a route. For people who stay, the future begins to sink into the ground beneath them. A repaired wall implies a tomorrow in the same place. Stored grain implies a season not yet arrived. Buried ancestors imply a past that remains physically present. Children born in such a place grow up not only with stories of movement, but with stones paths and graves that confirm continuity. The landscapes becomes a kind of memory machine. It teaches people to think in cycles of return, repair, storage, and inheritance. No single explanation fully accounts for this change, but once people begin to bind themselves to place begins to reshape them in return. The ancient valley that raised the first settled humans is therefore not a backdrop. It is an active force in the story. Its springs, grasses, animals, cliffs, heat, floods, droughts, and seasonal gifts all press upon human choices. It does not command people to settle, as if history were inevitable. It offers chances, imposes limits, rewards attention, and punishes mistakes. Across generations, human communities learn its moods and begin to build lives around them. The first steps are modest, almost invisible beside the later spectacle of cities and empires. But the quietness is deceptive. In the worn stones and early floors of this valley lies one of the deepest turning points in human history, the moment when home begins to mean not only the people one travels with, but the place one returns to, repairs, remembers, and eventually refuses to leave. As the last ice age begins to loosen its grip, the valley does not awaken all at once. It changes in pulses, in uneven breaths, in wet centuries and dry ones, in the slow retreat of cold from distant mountains, and the subtle rearrangement of plants across hillsides. Ice sheets never cover the Jordan Valley itself in the way they cover the far north, but their influence reaches it through wind, sea level, rainfall, temperature, and the great atmospheric systems that decide where clouds will break. The people living here do not measure these changes in degrees or millennia. They know them through ripening seasons, animal movements, the taste of water, the depth of mud, the failure or abundance of seed. A valley that had always demanded attention now begins to offer new patterns, and those patterns matter. In a world where survival depends on reading the land, even a small shift in rainfall can change the balance between moving on and staying. During the colder phases of the late Ice Age, the eastern Mediterranean world is often cooler, and in many periods drier than the climate that follows. The exact local conditions vary, and scholars still debate the details for different parts of the Levant, but broad patterns are clear enough to frame the human story. Vegetation zones move, woodlands expand or contract, grasslands change their reach, lakes rise and fall. The Dead Sea Basin records enormous fluctuations in water level, a reminder that this is not a timeless landscape frozen in one form. It is alive with climatic tension. To later eyes, the valley may seem ancient and permanent, carved into the earth like a fixed stage. But to the people of the late Pleistocene, it is a place where opportunity can appear, vanish, and return again. What survives in the record suggests that these communities live inside a world of repeated adjustment, long before anyone plants a field in the familiar agricultural sense. As warmer conditions spread after the last glacial maximum, the lands of the Levant begin to support richer combinations of plants and animals in many areas. Oak and pistachio woodlands become more significant in some zones. Stands of wild wheat and barley appear where soils, rainfall and season align. Wetlands and lakes can become magnets for birds, fish, reeds and mammals. The valley and its surrounding slopes form a mosaic rather than a single habitat, and that mosaic is crucial. It allows people to combine resources from different ecological pockets without abandoning the whole region. A group might gather seeds in one season, hunt gazelle along open ground in another, collect nuts from wooded hills, trap birds near water, or dig edible roots from softer soils. This flexibility is not new to humans, but the density and proximity of these resources make the old skills especially powerful here. The end of the Ice Age also changes the meaning of distance. When resources are thin and scattered, mobility stretches wide. People move far because they must. When resources become more predictable in clustered places, the range of movement can shrink without immediate disaster. That does not mean people suddenly stop travelling. Networks remain important. Seasonal movement continues. Exchange, marriage, ties, and shared knowledge still link groups across landscapes, but the centre of gravity begins to shift. Certain places become worth returning to more often. A spring that reliably flows through dry months becomes not merely useful but strategic. A hillside where wild grain ripens thickly becomes a remembered promise. A camp beside watershade and hunting routes becomes more than a pause. It becomes a node in a seasonal world, and over time some nodes grow heavier than others. This is one of the quiet revolutions of the period. People are not yet building cities, but they are beginning to compress more life into fewer places. Archaeologists see this not through grand monuments, but through repeated occupation layers, clusters of stone tools, hearths grinding stones, and traces of plant pre-essing. A camp used once leaves a thin shadow. A place used again and again becomes archaeologically loud. Sediment builds, ash accumulates, floors are repaired or remade. Tools are discarded, replaced, sharpened, and lost. Bones gather in patterns that hint at meals, hunting strategies, and waste. These remains reveal a subtle change in human tempo. The valley is no longer simply one stop among countless stops. Certain locations begin to gather time, yet this gathering of time is not only practical, it changes relationships among people. A group that returns to the same place every year develops expectations. Paths become familiar. Good sleeping places are known. Children learn landmarks not as passing features but as parts of a recurring world. Older people carry detailed memory of seasons when grain was heavy or when the herds failed to come. Such knowledge becomes more valuable when a community's life is increasingly tied to specific places. In a highly mobile world, wisdom often lies in knowing where to go next. In a semi-settled world, wisdom also lies in knowing how a place behaves across many years. The valley rewards those who remember. There is a lesser-known strangeness in this transition. Settled life may begin not because people discover farming, but because hunter-gatherers become so successful in certain landscapes that staying longer becomes possible before full domestication exists. This reverses the simple story often told later, where farming creates villages. In parts of the Levant, more durable settlements appear among communities still relying heavily on wild resources. They are not poor wanderers waiting for agriculture to rescue them. They are skilled foragers using a rich environment with increasing intensity. The evidence remains incomplete, but it suggests that sedentism and cultivation do not always arrive in the order once assumed. Sometimes people settle first, and only later does the pressure of staying make cultivation more attractive. The valley's climate after the Ice Age encourages this possibility, but it does not guarantee it. Other regions also become more hospitable, and not all of them produce the same early settlement patterns. This is why the story cannot be reduced to warmth alone. Climate opens doors, but people decide how to move through them. Culture matters, social ties matter, ritual and memory may matter, the location of ancestors may matter. A place where groups meet for seasonal abundance can become a place of ceremony, marriage, exchange, and obligation. Feasting may draw people together. Shared burial grounds may hold them emotionally close. A landscape of food can become a landscape of meaning, and meaning can anchor people as strongly as grain. Even abundance has consequences. When more people gather in favoured places, the old freedom of movement becomes complicated. A spring used by one small band is different from a spring known to many families. A rich grain patch can feed people, but it can also become something worth defending, negotiating over, or claiming through repeated use. The seeds of later territory are difficult to see, but this is where they may begin. Not in walls and armies, but in memory, return, and expectation. The claim is not yet written on a tablet or marked by a king's boundary stone. It is carried in the statement made by action. This is where the group comes back. This is where its dead lie. This is where its tools are stored. This is where its children know the ground. As the ice loosens far away, the valley becomes a testing ground for a new kind of human future. The old mobile world does not vanish. It remains strong, intelligent, and necessary. But alongside it, another rhythm emerges, one tied more tightly to water plants, stored food, and remembered places. This rhythm is fragile at first. A drought can interrupt it. A failed season can scatter people again. The landscape can invite settlement and then withdraw its support with quiet cruelty. But each return leaves traces. Each repaired hearth, each worn grinding stone, each burial placed near a living area, deepens the bond between human life and fixed ground. The valley is becoming familiar in a new way, not merely as country to be crossed, but as a place that can hold the past and promise the future. By the time later generations look back, the earlier steps will be almost impossible to separate from what follows. Farming villages, walls, ritual centres, and cities will make the beginning seem obvious. But in this warming world after the Ice Age, nothing is obvious yet. There are only people watching seasons change, judging the weight of grain heads in their hands, noticing where animals return, remembering which springs endure, and slowly discovering that a place can become part of the human body of memory. The valley does not raise settled humans by offering comfort alone. It raises them by making return worthwhile, by making knowledge accumulate, and by turning the end of an icebound age into the beginning of a more rooted one. The people who begin to stay longer are not stepping out of a primitive darkness into civilization. They already live in a world dense with knowledge. They know stone, wood, bone fibre, hide fire, wind animal movement, and the hidden calendars of plants. They understand that a landscape is not one thing, but many overlapping seasons, each with its own dangers and invitations. In the Levant, these late hunter-gatherers become especially visible through what archaeologists call the Natufian culture, a name given not by the people themselves whose own words are lost, but by modern researchers after discoveries in the Wadi an-Natuf area. The name is only a label. Behind it are real communities living between roughly the later stages of the Ice Age and the beginning of the Holocene, at the edge of one of the greatest transformations in human history. They are still hunters and gatherers, but they are also something more difficult to define. They are people whose camps are beginning to look like homes. Their world is built from return. Across the hills, terraces, and valley margins of the southern Levant, Natufian groups occupy caves, open-air camps, and more substantial settlements, sometimes for long periods, sometimes seasonally, sometimes in ways scholars still debate. What matters is not that every group becomes sedentary in the same way. The evidence remains incomplete, and the Natufian world itself is diverse. Some communities may remain highly mobile. Others seem to settle for much of the year or return so predictably that their places accumulate unusually deep traces. This unevenness is important because it reminds us that the birth of settled life is not a single invention spreading like a command. It is a series of experiments made by people responding to local resources, social needs, climate pressures, and inherited habits. The valley and its nearby hills do not produce one answer. They produce possibilities. At several Natufian sites, the signs of longer residence are hard to ignore. There are stone-built structures, often rounded or semi-subterranean, with floors cut into the ground and walls made from local material. There are hearths that suggest repeated cooking and warmth. There are grinding stones, mortars, pestles, and sickle blades used to harvest and process wild plants. Some of these tools are heavy. That small detail carries enormous meaning. A lightweight toolkit suits a life of frequent travel. A heavy grinding stone implies either that a group does not plan to move it often, or that it expects to return to it. Weight becomes a clue. Stone once placed begins to anchor human action. A person can walk away from a campfire. A massive mortar asks to be used again. The gathering of wild cereals is one of the defining features of this world, though it must not be mistaken for farming too quickly. Wild wheat and barley grow naturally in parts of the Levant, and people have likely eaten seeds for far longer than the Natufian period. But here the scale and intensity appear to change. Sickle blades sometimes carry a glossy sheen formed by cutting silica-rich plant stems. Grinding stones show repeated processing of seeds into meal. Storage may have existed in forms that are difficult to detect using basket skins, pits, or other organic materials that rarely survive. What survives in the record suggests not merely occasional gathering, but regular investment. Grain is small, stubborn food. It must be harvested at the right moment, carried threshed, winnowed, ground, cooked, and protected from pests and moisture. It is not the easiest food in the world, but it has one quality that matters more and more as people stay it can be stored. Storage changes the emotional shape of life. Food no longer exists only as what can be eaten today or found tomorrow. It can become a reserve, a promise, a source of security, and perhaps a source of tension. Stored food asks to be guarded. It can be shared generously, displayed in feasts hidden from rivals or controlled by particular households. No one should imagine fully developed property systems too early, but the act of storing introduces new questions. Who gathered this grain? Who may eat it? Who remembers where it is kept? Who decides when it is opened? These questions leave little direct evidence, but they are the kind of social pressures that settled life encourages. Even before fields, the storehouse begins to change relationships. The Natufian people also hunt, and their hunting is neither casual nor simple. Gazelle bones are common at many sites, showing the importance of these swift animals in the diet. Gazelle move in herds through open landscapes, and hunting them requires planning, cooperation, knowledge of terrain, and the ability to predict behavior. Other animals also appear in the record depending on the site and environment. Wild cattle, deer, boar, hare, birds, tortoises, fish, and small mammals. The diet is broad because the landscape is broad. This breadth may be one reason longer settlement becomes possible. A community depending on only one resource is vulnerable. A community that can combine grain, nuts, game, fish, birds, and gathered plants can remain in one place longer without exhausting every option immediately. Still, the balance is delicate. More people in one place means more mouths, more waste, and more pressure on nearby resources. One of the most surprising details of the Natufian world is the presence of dogs. Dogs had already begun their long relationship with humans before agriculture, and in the Levant there are famous burials suggesting a close bond between humans and these animals. At one site, a human burial associated with a puppy has often been taken as a sign of emotional connection, though scholars continue to discuss the exact meaning. It is a small image, almost painfully intimate, not a king with treasure, not a warrior with weapons, but a human and an animal companion placed together in death. The detail matters because it shows that the transformation towards settled life is not only about plants and houses, it is also about changing relationships among species. Dogs may help with hunting protection, warning companionship, and perhaps the emotional texture of camp life. Around the edges of early settlement, the human world is already becoming a multi-species world. The dead become part of these places too. Natufian burials appear in or near occupation areas, sometimes with ornaments, shells, stone, objects, bone tools, or other materials. Some bodies are treated in ways that suggest care, identity, or ritual, though the meanings remain debated. Shell beads may come from distant coasts, hinting at exchange networks or journeys beyond the immediate valley. Personal ornaments suggest that appearance, belonging, and social identity matter deeply. The living do not simply consume the landscape, they create symbols within it. They carry materials across distance, wear them on bodies, and sometimes place them with the dead. A camp with burials is not just a useful place, it is a place with memory underfoot. This closeness between living and dead may be one of the invisible forces behind staying. A mobile group can remember ancestors through story and path, but a settled or repeatedly occupied place can hold them physically. The grave becomes a claim, a bond, a point of return. It may not function as property in a later legal sense, but it strengthens the connection between people and ground. The house, the hearth, the grinding stone, and the burial all begin to speak the same quiet language. This place matters, because life has happened here before. Children grow up near the remains of those who came before them. Adults repair structures built by earlier hands. The valley becomes layered with human presence, and each layer makes departure a little less simple. Still, the Natufian experiment is not a straight road toward farming. It contains reversals, variations, and unanswered questions. Some sites suggest more sedentary patterns, others more mobility. Climate shifts may disrupt abundance. Social choices may pull groups together or drive them apart. No single explanation fully accounts for why some communities invest so heavily in place while others do not. But the Natufian world reveals the threshold more clearly than almost anywhere else. Here, before domesticated wheat fully reshapes the land, before goats and sheep fill village pens, before pottery becomes common, human beings are already changing the terms of existence. They are building, grinding, burying, storing, decorating, returning, and remembering. They still belong to the old world of hunters and gatherers, but they are also raising the foundations of a new one. In the ancient valley and its surrounding hill, staying begins as practice before it becomes destiny. It is learned through the body, the weight of stone tools, the rhythm of harvesting, the smell of hearth smoke in a familiar shelter, the path from water to camp, the grave past each morning, the dog sleeping near the fire. These are not dramatic inventions in the later heroic sense. They are repeated acts. Yet repeated acts are how deep history often moves. Long before anyone names a village, the habits of village life are being rehearsed. Long before anyone owns a field, people are learning the value of a harvest place. Long before anyone builds a city wall, communities are discovering that shared ground can hold them together. The first settled humans are not born in a single moment. They are raised slowly by the valley, by the seasons, and by the decision to come back once more. By the time stone houses begin to appear beside ancient water, the change has already been building for generations. No one wakes one morning and invents the village. A shelter is strengthened, a floor is levelled, a hearth is rebuilt in the same place. A wall that might once have been temporary becomes worth repairing. The ground itself begins to hold the memory of repeated hands. Around springs, lakes, and valley margins, early communities start to leave remains that feel different from the brief camps of a fully mobile life. They are still close to the older world of foraging, hunting, and seasonal movement, but their traces grow heavier. Stone settles into circles. Post holes mark where roofs once stood. Ash deepens. Tools accumulate. The valley which had once been crossed and revisited begins to be occupied with a new kind of intention. The earlier structures are often modest when compared with later architecture, but their modesty is deceptive. Many are rounded, sometimes partly sunk into the earth, with stone foundations supporting walls of brush, mud, timber, or other materials that rarely survive. A circular house may seem simple, but it represents planning, labour, and expectation. Stones must be gathered and set. The floor must be prepared. A roof must be built strongly enough to endure weather and use. The interior must be arranged around sleeping, cooking, storage, tool-making, and social life. A structure like this does not need to last forever to matter. It only needs to last long enough for people to return repair and recognize it as part of their world. In that recognition, architecture becomes memory. The roundness of many early houses is one of those details that can feel strangely intimate. Later villages in the Near East will often favor rectangular buildings which fit more easily together and can be expanded into dense compounds. But the earlier rounded forms suggest a different social and spatial logic. They may reflect older hut traditions, practical building habits, or ways of organizing domestic space that do not yet require the sharper divisions of later household architecture. Scholars still debate exactly what these forms reveal about family structure, ownership, and community life. The evidence remains incomplete because walls survive more readily than behavior. Still, the shape of a house matters. It guides movement. It decides where bodies sleep, where food is prepared, where tools are kept, where smoke gathers, and where people face one another in the dim light of a hearth. Inside and around these structures, everyday life leaves a dense record of repetition. Hearths hold ash, charcoal, burned stones, and fragments of meals. Grinding stones sit near working areas, their surfaces polished by grain seeds and other plant foods. Flint blades, scrapers, borers, and points gather in clusters where tools are made or repaired. Animal bones show butchery, cooking, discard, and sometimes craft. Shells, beads, and pigments hint at adornment and identity. Storage pits, where preserved, suggest planning beyond immediate hunger. A pit cut into the floor or nearby ground is not merely a hole. It is a small argument with uncertainty. It says that food, tools, or valuables can be placed away from sight and brought back into use later. It says that tomorrow is expected to arrive here. Water is the quiet partner in this architecture. A house near a dependable spring is different from a house in a place where water vanishes after the season turns. In the Jordan Valley and the broader Levant springs become magnets, not only because they offer drinking water, but because they structure the movement of animals, plants and people. Around water reeds can grow, birds can gather, animals can be tracked, and small gardens or managed plant patches may later become possible. Water also creates risk. It attracts insect predators, rivals, and disease. It can flood, stagnate, or become contested. Yet the pull is undeniable. Early settlement is not spread randomly across the map. It gathers where the land can support repeated life, and in a dry region no feature is more persuasive than reliable water. The houses themselves are not isolated inventions. They belong to wider activity zones that show how life is becoming organized. There may be places for grinding, places for cooking, places for tool production, places for burial, places for refuse, and open spaces where people work together. These divisions are subtle at first, but they matter. A mobile camp also has organization, often highly sophisticated, but permanent or repeated structures make organization more durable. When people return to the same built space, habits become embedded in the ground. A certain corner is where tools are stored. A certain patch outside the wall is where seeds are processed. A certain area is avoided because the dead lie beneath or near it. Space begins to carry instructions. One lesser known but important detail is that some early settled places may have required regular cleaning, maintenance, and waste management in ways earlier mobile camps did not. Staying creates dirt. It gathers scraps, bones, ash-broken tools, human waste parasites, rodents, and smells. The romance of the first village often hides this practical problem. A mobile group can leave a dirty camp behind and return after time has softened its traces. A settled group must manage accumulation. Floors may be resurfaced. Refuse may be moved. Hearths may be cleared. Old structures may be filled in or rebuilt. These tasks are not dramatic, but they are part of the birth of settlement. The first houses do not only create shelter, they create chores that never entirely end. In this way, settled life begins to discipline the body. People wake near the same walls. They walk the same paths to water. They grind food in the same places, sometimes for hours. They repair roofs, maintain fires, clear debris, watch stored food, and guard tools that are too heavy to carry away easily. Children grow within a built environment that teaches them where things belong. The older world of movement remains close, but a new rhythm settles into muscles and memory. The house is not only an object, it is a teacher. It trains people to think in terms of inside and outside, near and far mine, and shared clean and unclean old floor and new floor living space and burial space. The archaeological record cannot show every feeling that came with this change. It cannot tell us whether people felt safer behind walls of stone and mud, or whether some felt trapped by them. It cannot tell us how often arguments erupted over storage labor or sleeping space. It cannot tell us whether older generations praised the stability of a familiar place, while younger people longed for movement beyond the hills. What survives in the record suggests both opportunity and strain. The house gives shelter, continuity, and a center. It also binds people to maintenance, neighbors' waste, and social pressure. The first settled communities are not peaceful utopias waiting for civilization to arrive. They are human experiments full of cooperation and friction. And still the houses multiply. Not everywhere, not evenly, not permanently in every case, but enough to show that something powerful is happening. A structure built once may be chance. A structure rebuilt across generations becomes tradition. A cluster of structures becomes community. A community that buries its dead stores, food, processes grain, and returns to water begins to form a new relationship with time. The valley's stones become part of human biography. A person may be born in a shelter whose floor was laid by someone already dead. A child may learn to grind seeds on a stone used by a grandparent. A burial beneath or near a dwelling may make ancestry part of daily movement. The built environment turns memory into something almost physical. This is why the early stone houses beside ancient water matter so deeply. They are not impressive because they are large. They are impressive because they reveal commitment. They show that humans are beginning to invest labour in places beyond immediate need. They show that a camp can become a home, and that home can become the seed of an entirely different world. Later architecture will rise higher, walls will become defensive, temples will dominate skylines, palaces will declare power. But beneath those later achievements lies this quieter beginning, a rounded structure, a prepared floor, a hearth darkened by repeated fire, a grinding stone too heavy to wander far, and a spring nearby that keeps calling people back. In the valley, settlement is becoming visible one stone ring at a time. The grain does not look like a revolution at first. It looks like grass. It grows among other grasses, bending under wind, turning from green to gold, as the season dries, scattering its seeds when the time comes. To an animal, it is food among many foods. To a person who knows how to read the valley, it is something more complicated. It is abundance that appears briefly and must be taken at the right moment. It is labour hidden inside plenty. It is a promise that can be broken by drought birds, insects, mould, fire, or a harvest delayed too long. Wild wheat and barley do not announce that they will help create villages, fields, taxes, granaries, famine, bread, and empire. They simply ripen on their stalks. But in the ancient valley and the lands around it, people begin to pay attention to them with an intensity that changes everything. Long before true domestication, humans are already gathering seeds. This is important because the story of agriculture is often told as if people suddenly discover that plants are edible and then become farmers. The truth is older and more subtle. Hunter-gatherers understand plant life with extraordinary precision. They know which seeds can be eaten raw, which must be roasted, which require grinding, which cause sickness if prepared badly, and which plants ripen first after rain. They know that some foods are worth the effort only in times of need, while others can become staples if gathered in quantity. Wild cereals belong to this second category. They are not easy, but they reward patience. When dense stands grow near reliable water, and within reach of settled or semi-settled communities, they become unusually important. The process begins with harvesting, and harvesting wild grain is a race against the plant's own survival strategy. Wild cereals are designed to scatter. Their seed heads become brittle at maturity, breaking apart so that seeds fall to the ground and create the next generation. For humans, this is inconvenient. Gather too early and the seeds may be immature. Wait too long and much of the harvest is already lost into the soil. People must learn the precise moment when the grain is ripe enough to use but not yet gone. They may cut stems with flint sickle blades set into wooden or bone handles. They may beat seed heads into baskets. They may gather fallen grain from the ground. Each method has costs. Each method leaves different traces, and scholars still debate exactly how early communities harvested at different stages. But the repeated appearance of sickle blades grinding stones and plant remains suggests a growing commitment to this narrow seasonal window. Once harvested, grain must be transformed. The seed does not become food simply because it's taken from the plant. It must be dried, threshed, winnowed, pounded, ground, mixed, cooked, and protected. Anyone who imagines early grain eating as an easy path to comfort has not listened to the stone. Grinding is slow, repetitive, and physically demanding. Knees, backs, shoulders, wrists, and teeth all become part of the agricultural story before agriculture fully begins. Microscopic wear on tools, dental damage, and skeletal stress in later communities all hint at the cost of turning seeds into daily food. The valley's first grain users are not being handed leisure by nature. They are trading one kind of uncertainty for another kind of work. Yet grain has a power that fresh meat, many fruits, and leafy plants do not have. It can wait. Properly dried and protected, it can be stored through bad days and lean seasons. This single quality changes the human relationship with the future. A gazelle must be eaten, shared, dried, or lost. A ripe fig is brief. A fish spoils quickly. But a basket of grain can sit in darkness holding sunlight from a past season for a hunger that has not yet arrived. This is almost magical, though it is not magic at all. It is chemistry, dryness containers, vigilance and memory. It allows people to imagine staying through periods when the landscape gives less. It allows larger groups to gather for longer. It may support feasts, obligations, and social debts. It may also create anxiety because stored food attracts not only hungry people, but rodents, insects, and suspicion. The surprising detail hidden in early grain use is that humans may have begun altering the future of plants before they fully understood what they were doing. When people harvest wild cereals, especially if they collect seeds from plants whose heads do not shatter too quickly, they may unintentionally favor traits that become important in domestication. In wild stands, brittle seed heads help the plant reproduce naturally. In human-managed harvesting, non-brittle forms are more likely to remain on the stalk long enough to be gathered and later planted, whether deliberately or accidentally. Over generations, this can shift plant populations. The evidence for exactly when and where full domestication appears is complex, and no single site tells the whole story. But the principle is profound. Plants begin to change because humans keep choosing gathering, moving, and eventually sowing them. Domestication is not only an invention, it is a relationship that tightens over time. At first, cultivation may not look like fields in the later sense. It may involve protecting useful stands, clearing competing plants, scattering seeds near camp, returning to favored patches, or encouraging growth in places that are easier to guard and harvest. The line between gathering and farming is not a wall, it is a blurred zone of behavior. A community can rely mostly on wild plants while still managing them in small ways. A person can drop seeds near a settlement without imagining a future called agriculture. A group can notice that disturbed soil near camp produces useful plants. They can learn that fire clearing, digging, and trampling change what grows. What survives in the record suggests that early cultivation emerges from attention as much as from intention. People do not need a theory of domestication to begin reshaping plant life. The valley encourages such experiments because it concentrates different ecological opportunities close together. Wild cereals thrive best in certain zones, not everywhere on the valley floor, and communities likely move between elevations and habitats to gather them. But reliable water, nearby slopes, and seasonal predictability make the broader region unusually suited for repeated plant use. The people who live here are not passively waiting for nature to feed them. They are making choices. They return to the same stands. They carry seeds. They grind them into food. They store them. They perhaps scatter some, whether by accident or practice, near places where human disturbance creates new growth. The plant world begins to enter human space, and human space begins to enter the plant world. Grain also changes social life because it is divisible and countable in ways many foods are not. A carcass can be shared, but it announces itself dramatically and disappears quickly. Grain can be measured, portioned, hidden, accumulated, and distributed over time. It can become a quiet form of power. In the earliest communities, that power may remain limited, and scholars still debate how much inequality existed before later farming villages. But the possibility is there. Someone knows where the stored baskets are. Someone decides whether a reserve is opened for a feast, a famine, a ritual, or a neighbor in need. Someone may gain respect by generosity or influence by control. The seed is small, but its social shadow is long. This does not mean grain alone creates settlement. No single explanation fully accounts for the shift. People also depend on hunting, gathering fishing nuts, fruits, legumes, and social networks. Climate matters, water matters, burial and ritual may matter, population pressure may matter. But grain adds a new layer to the valley's story because it allows time to be stored in edible form. It lets a community remain near houses and graves when the immediate landscape thins. It supports the repair of place. It deepens the logic of return. A group that has invested weeks harvesting and processing grain, then hidden or protected it near camp, has another reason to come back. The food itself becomes an anchor. The change is not without danger. A population that leans more heavily on grain can suffer if harvests fail. Diets may narrow, labour can intensify. Teeth wear down from stone-ground flour containing tiny grit. Bodies bend over grinding stones. Storage can invite theft, pests, and conflict. The same plant that promises security can also create dependence. This is one of the great contradictions at the heart of settled life. The valley's people are not simply discovering a better way to live, they are entering a bargain. Grain offers survival through scarcity but asks for work, planning, protection, and eventually obedience to seasonal demands. Still, season after season, the bargain becomes harder to refuse. The gold heads of wild cereals ripen across familiar ground. Hands cut them, baskets fill, stones grind. Fires bake or boil the meal into food. Children taste a landscape transformed by labour. Elders remember which slopes gave the best harvest. Seeds pass from wild stands into human containers, from containers into bodies, from bodies back into the soil, through waste accident and eventually deliberate planting. The valley that once raised mobile foragers is now raising people who think differently about plants, time, hunger, and home. In the small dry seed, almost invisible against the dust, lies one of history's most powerful transformations. The first settled humans are not built by grain alone, but grain gives their staying weight rhythm and a future that can be held in the hand. The animals at the edge of camp are not yet livestock in the later village sense. They are watched, followed, feared, hunted, imitated, and remembered. Their tracks mark soft ground near water. Their bones lie beside hearths. Their horns, hides, sinews, teeth, feathers, and shells pass into tools, ornaments, bedding containers, bindings, and stories that are now mostly lost. In the ancient valley, humans do not stand apart from the animal world as later city people often imagine themselves doing. They live inside it, reading it with the seriousness of hunger. A distant movement of gazelle on a slope can change the day. The call of birds over wetlands can signal season. The presence of wild cattle near a spring can mean food, danger, or both. Long before pens and herds become ordinary, the people of the valley are already bound to animals through knowledge, pursuit, dependence, and an attention so close it becomes almost a form of companionship. For communities that are staying longer, hunting remains essential. Grain may be growing in importance, but it does not replace meat, fat, marrow hides, bone antler, or the social force of a successful hunt. Gazelle are especially important in many Natufian and early Levantine sites. Their bones appear in large numbers, showing that these swift, alert animals are a major part of the diet. Hunting gazelle is not a random chase across open land. It requires understanding routes, breeding seasons, herd behaviour, wind direction, terrain, and cooperation among people. A hunter must know where animals prefer to move, where they can be driven, where they become vulnerable, and where a mistake means an empty camp. In some places, later hunting structures known as desert kites reveal the scale of communal animal capture in the wider region, though many belong to later periods. Even before such large features become common, the principle is already old. Humans survive by turning landscape knowledge into coordinated action. The valley and its surrounding zones offer many animals, but each demands a different relationship. Wild cattle or aurochs are powerful and dangerous, capable of injuring or killing humans. Deer move through woodland edges. Wild boar seek wetter, denser habitats, and can be unpredictable. Hares, foxes, birds, tortoises, fish, and small mammals add variety to meals and materials. The bones left behind are not just scraps, they are records of decisions. Which animals are hunted most? Which ages are taken? Which body parts are carried back to camp? Which bones are broken for marrow? Which are shaped into tools? Archaeologists read these patterns carefully, though the evidence remains incomplete and often difficult to interpret. A pile of bones can suggest abundance, preference, scarcity, ritual, seasonality, or simple practicality. Sometimes it suggests several at once. At the edge of camp, animals also begin to adapt to humans. Dogs are the clearest early example. They are already companions before farming takes hold, and their presence among late hunter-gatherer communities shows that domestication begins first, not with sheep or wheat, but with a predator drawn into human society. The earliest dog-human relationship likely grows from many small interactions. Across generations, wolves, or wolf-like canids scavenging near camps, humans tolerating the less aggressive ones, pups being taken in, animals learning to read human movement, humans learning their usefulness. By the time dogs appear in burials and domestic contexts, something deep has already happened. A species once outside the firelight has crossed into it. Dogs may help in hunting, guarding, warning, tracking, warmth, waste cleanup, and companionship. But their significance is more than practical. They show that early settled life is not merely about humans controlling nature. It is about certain animals finding a place in human worlds and humans allowing those worlds to become less solitary. The transition from hunting wild animals to managing herds is slower and more complex. In the Jordan Valley itself, the early story of animal domestication connects to broader developments across the Fertile Crescent, including the Zagros, northern Mesopotamia, Anatolia, and the Levantine highlands. Goats and sheep are not simply invented in one pen one day. Their domestication involves long patterns of selective hunting protection, movement, breeding control, and tolerance of human proximity. Scholars still debate the exact pathways and timing in different regions, but the broad direction is clear. Humans begin not only to kill animals, but to shape their lives. They may protect certain herds, follow them more closely, take young animals, control breeding males, or gradually favour animals less likely to flee or fight. Over generations, bodies change. Horn shapes, size-age profiles, and bone patterns begin to reveal new arrangement. Animals are no longer only wild neighbours. Some are becoming living stores of meat, milk, hide fibre, and future offspring. This is a profound shift because an animal herd is a different kind of food supply from a grain store. Grain waits silently in baskets and pits. Animals move, eat, breed, sicken, escape, and make noise. They require pasture, water protection, and human attention. They can carry wealth through time, but they can also die suddenly. They transform the landscape around settlements through grazing, trampling, dung, and browsing. They bring humans into new daily rhythms, watching, driving, separating, slaughtering, nursing, and guarding. Later pastoral life will become one of the great forces of history, but its roots lie in these early experiments when people learn that some animals can be kept near without immediately destroying the balance of camp life. No single explanation fully accounts for why this begins. Meat security, social display, ritual, sacrifice, population pressure, and opportunistic care of captured young may all play roles. What survives in the record suggests not a single plan, but a long tightening of contact. The animal world also changes the emotional and symbolic life of early communities. Horns, skulls, teeth, and animal parts sometimes appear in ritual or domestic contexts, and while interpretation must remain careful, these remains show that animals are not only calories, they are powers in the landscape. Aurochs represent danger and strength. Gazelle represents speed, abundance, and seasonal movement. Birds link wetlands, sky, and migration. Dogs occupy the threshold between wild and familiar. In later Neolithic sites across the region, animal symbolism becomes striking, sometimes appearing in plastered features, figurines, installations, and special deposits. The roots of that symbolism likely reach back into hunter-gatherer experience when animals were known as individual presences and collective patterns. People who live close to animals do not reduce them to meat. They notice personality, behavior, timing, beauty, and threat. There is also a darker side to bringing animals closer. Camps and early villages attract scavengers, rodents, insects, and predators. Stored grain feeds mice. Waste draws foxes and other animals. Dogs may help control some threats but introduce others. As humans, animals refuse and water cluster together, disease risks increase. Later settled life will create new pathways for parasites and infections, especially when domesticated animals live in close contact with people. The earliest stages are difficult to trace, but the logic is already present. Staying changes ecology. A camp that remains in place becomes a new habitat, one made by humans, but quickly discovered by other species. The village is never only human. It is an ecosystem of people, animals, plants, pests, microbes, and the materials they all leave behind. For the people of the valley, animals remain both outside and inside the human future. Gazelles still run beyond control. Wild cattle still command respect. Birds still come and go on their own terms. But dogs sleep near the fire, and the first managed herds begin to alter the old boundary between hunting and keeping. This boundary, like the boundary between gathering and farming, is blurred at the beginning. A community may still hunt most of its meat while occasionally holding young animals. It may protect a herd without fully owning it. It may kill selectively without realizing that selective pressure is changing the animals themselves. The evidence remains incomplete because behavior fossilizes poorly. But bones preserve enough to show that the relationship is changing. As grain teaches people to store sunlight, animals teach them to store life. A herd is food not yet eaten, motion not yet captured, wealth not yet spent. It carries risk, but also resilience. It ties people to pasture as grain ties them to fields. It asks for movement even within settlement, creating a world where villagers may stay rooted while herders range outward. The valley that raised the first settled humans does not cut them off from the wild. Instead, it teaches them to live at a new edge where wild animals, companion animals, and managed animals all shape the community. The future does not arrive as a clean separation from nature. It arrives with hoofprints near houses, dogs near hearths, bones in ash hides drying in the sun, and human eyes watching the animal world with the old hunger and new sense of possession. Then the climate turns against them. Not everywhere in the same way, not with one clean line that a human community can understand as history, but sharply enough to leave a mark across the ancient world. After centuries of relative warming, when plants expand and people settle more deeply into favoured places, the earth slips back into a colder and drier rhythm. This reversal is known today as the Younger Dryas, a name taken from a tough Arctic flower whose pollen helped reveal the return of cold conditions in northern records. To the people of the Levant, there is no name for it that survives. There is only the change itself. Rains may become less reliable. Plant communities shift. The stands of wild grain that once seemed dependable may thin, move, or fail in certain years. Springs and wetlands may still offer refuge, but the surrounding world becomes harder to trust. The valley that had encouraged return now begins to test whether return can survive scarcity. The Younger Dryas begins around 12,900 years ago and lasts for more than 1,000 years, though its effects vary across regions. In the Levant, the broad pattern is often understood as cooler and drier than the period just before it, but the local details remain debated. Some areas may suffer more than others. Some springs continue to flow. Some microenvironments remain productive enough to support occupation. This unevenness matters because people do not experience climate as an average. They experience it as the failure of a slope, the drying of a seasonal stream, the late arrival of rain, the absence of animals on a known route, the shrinking of a plant stand that once filled baskets. Climate is not an abstract force in their lives. It is hunger movement, argument, improvisation and memory. For communities already leaning toward longer residence, this reversal creates a profound dilemma. A fully mobile group can respond to scarcity by moving farther, widening its search, breaking into smaller units, or renewing distant ties. People who have invested heavily in houses, storage places, burial grounds, and local grain patches have more to lose by leaving. Staying has given them advantages, but it has also made departure more complicated. Their dead lie nearby. Their heavy grinding stones remain in place. Their knowledge is concentrated around familiar resources. Their social life may depend on other families who gather at the same settlement. When the land becomes less generous, they are caught between the old solution of movement and the new weight of place. This is why the Younger Dryas is often treated as a possible turning point in the birth of agriculture. The idea is not that one cold century suddenly invents farming. The evidence does not support anything so simple. Rather, environmental stress may have pushed communities already familiar with wild cereal storage and semi-settled life toward more active management of plants. If grain stands become less predictable, people may begin to protect favoured patches. Clear competing plants scatter seeds in better locations or remain near reliable water, where cultivation becomes easier. What had once been a useful supplement may become a necessity. What had once been occasional tending may become repeated practice. Scholars still debate the strength of this connection, and no single explanation fully accounts for the timing. But the logic is powerful when the old abundance falters. Experimentation becomes more attractive. The valley's diversity may have helped people endure the crisis, but it also may have intensified competition around the best places. Springs, wetlands, and well-watered pockets become more valuable when the wider landscape dries. A group that once ranged comfortably across many resources may now cluster near fewer dependable ones. More people near fewer reliable places means greater pressure on plants, animals, fuel, and social relationships. Hunting may become less predictable if animal ranges shift. Gathering may require more labour for smaller returns. Stored grain may become more important and therefore more contested. In this kind of world, the habit of planning ahead stops being merely useful and becomes essential. One lesser-known consequence of climate stress is that it can preserve old lifeways and accelerate new ones at the same time. Some groups may respond by returning to greater mobility, loosening their ties to particular settlements, and following resources across wider territories. Others may do the opposite, intensifying their investment in the most reliable places. This means the Younger Dryas does not produce one uniform human response. It creates a landscape of choices. Some communities scatter, some persist. Some combine movement and settlement in new ways. Some may fail. The archaeological record catches only fragments of these outcomes, often separated by gaps and damaged by time. What survives suggests a world under pressure but not a world without agency. Pressure also changes the meaning of labor. In a generous season, gathering wild grain may feel like a demanding but rewarding task. In a leaner world, the same task may become urgent, repetitive, and controlled by stricter expectations. More hands may be needed at harvest. More care may be taken in storage. More attention may be given to which seeds are saved where they are dropped and which patches are protected. The work of women, men, elders, and children may become more sharply organized around survival, though the exact division of labor remains uncertain. Grinding stones, sickle blades, storage pits, and repaired structures become the quiet tools of resilience. The community survives not through one heroic act but through repeated discipline. Yet crisis alone cannot explain settlement. This is one of the hidden contradictions in the story. If conditions become too harsh, staying is impossible. If conditions are too easy, cultivation may not be necessary. The first settled humans emerge in the difficult middle ground where resources are rich enough to support repeated occupation, but unstable enough to reward management, storage, and cooperation. The younger Dryas may have narrowed that middle ground and made human decisions more consequential. In the valley, reliable water and ecological variety provide refuges. Around those refuges, people may become more deliberate. They do not conquer the climate, they negotiate with it. The emotional world of such a period is impossible to reconstruct fully, but its outlines can be imagined with caution. Older people may remember wetter years, heavier harvests, larger herds, or easier movement. Younger people may grow up knowing uncertainty as normal. A settlement that once felt like a place of abundance may begin to feel vulnerable. The storage pit becomes a source of comfort and anxiety. The spring becomes precious. The surrounding hills are watched with sharper eyes. When a harvest fails, the community must decide whether to consume reserves, seek help, travel, hunt farther, or gamble on the next season. In these choices, social bonds are tested. Generosity can hold a group together. Suspicion can break it apart. There is also the possibility that ritual becomes more important under pressure. When the environment turns unstable, people often intensify practices that create cohesion, meaning, and a sense of control. Archaeology cannot easily prove what people believe, but the growing importance of burial, special deposits, ornaments, and communal spaces in the broader transition suggests that practical survival and symbolic life are intertwined. A group facing uncertainty does not live by calories alone. It needs trust, memory, obligation, and shared explanations for suffering. The dead beneath the ground, the feast after a successful harvest, the careful placement of objects, the repeated return to a significant place may all help people endure what no single household can manage alone. By the end of the Younger Dryas, the world changes again. Warmer and wetter conditions return in many areas. With the beginning of the Holocene, and the communities that have survived the hard interval are no longer exactly what they were before. Some have deepened their knowledge of plant management. Some have strengthened their attachment to reliable places. Some have carried forward tools, habits, and social arrangements shaped by scarcity. When better conditions arrive, those experiments do not disappear. They expand. The crisis does not create farming from nothing, but it may help transform possibility into commitment. The Valley's test is therefore not simply a disaster story. It is a story of pressure turning old knowledge into new dependence. The people here already know wild grain, seasonal return, storage, hunting water, and stone-built shelter. The Younger Dryas forces those practices into a harsher light. It asks whether staying can survive when staying becomes difficult. In answering, communities begin to cross another threshold. They learn that the land can no longer be trusted only as it is found. It must be watched, encouraged, guarded, and sometimes altered. The first settled humans are raised not only by abundance but by interruption. The valley teaches them to return, and then the climate teaches them that return must be defended. Jericho rises from the plain not as a city at first, but as a stubborn act of staying. The name belongs to later ages, to walls rebuilt and destroyed, to stories layered over stories, to palms, springs, trade, conquest, and memory. But beneath all of that lies something older, stranger, and quieter. A settlement near a powerful spring close to the deep trench of the Jordan Valley, where people begin to build with a confidence that still unsettles the modern imagination. The place sits in a landscape of heat and contrast, with desert margins nearby and water, pushing life upward from the ground. In such country, a spring is not merely a pleasant feature. It is a magnet. It draws plants, animals, travellers, insects, danger and possibility. Around that water, people return so often and invest so heavily that the ground becomes one of the most important archaeological records of early settled life anywhere on Earth. The ancient mound known as Tel Sultan preserves many layers, and those layers matter because Jericho is not one moment. It is a long accumulation of human choices, collapses, rebuildings, abandonments, and returns. Earlier occupation in the region stretches back into the Natufian world and beyond, but the most famous early settlement belongs to the pre-pottery Neolithic, when people live in substantial communities before pottery becomes part of everyday life. That detail surprises many people. The house's walls, tower, burials, grinding tools, and plant remains belong to a world that has not yet filled its kitchens with ceramic vessels. Containers exist, certainly made of basketry, stonewood, skin, plaster, and other materials, but fired pottery is not yet the common signature of village life. Jericho reminds us that settlement architecture, cultivation, and social organization do not wait for every later invention to arrive in the proper order. Human life changes unevenly, and the ground preserves that unevenness. At the heart of Jericho's early importance is water. The spring near the site provides dependable flow in an environment where dependable water carries enormous power. A community living there has access not only to drinking water, but to the ecological richness that water creates. Plants can grow nearby, animals can be drawn within reach, reeds, mud, and other materials become available. Routes through the valley pass close enough to connect the settlement to wider landscapes. The site does not need to be imagined as isolated. It sits within networks of movement, exchange, and memory. People may come and go carrying stone shells, stories, marriage ties, and knowledge of distant places. The settlement is rooted but not sealed off. Like the valley itself, it is both home and corridor. The early houses at Jericho show a community deeply invested in built space. In the earlier pre-pottery Neolithic levels, many dwellings are rounded or oval with mud brick or stone elements and plastered surfaces. Later, rectangular buildings become more common, reflecting broader changes in architecture across the region. Floors may be carefully prepared. Domestic space is arranged and maintained. Burials appear in relation to houses. Food processing tools show the daily labour of turning plants into meals. The people living here are not simply camping beside a spring, they are making place durable. They are building a world where the same ground supports birth work, eating, death, memory, and return. The evidence remains incomplete, but the pattern is unmistakable. Jericho is one of the places where the village becomes unmistakably visible. And then there is the wall. Few features in early archaeology have attracted as much attention, and few have been so easily misunderstood. The stone wall of early Jericho, along with its massive tower, has often been described in dramatic terms as if it were clearly a defensive fortification guarding a city from enemies. It may have had defensive functions. It may have marked the settlement. It may have protected against flood or erosion. It may have helped manage the slope of the mound. It may have carried symbolic meaning. Scholars still debate its purpose because no single explanation fully accounts for its scale, location, and context. The danger is to impose later ideas of warfare, city walls, and political authority too early. Jericho's wall belongs to a world before kings and written military records. Its meaning must be approached carefully. The tower is even more haunting. Built of stone rising above the settlement with an internal stairway, it required coordinated labour and planning. People had to quarry or collect stones, move them, shape the structure, organise workers and maintain a shared purpose long enough to complete it. This is not the work of a few idle hours. It implies community coordination at a scale that challenges the old assumption that complex public works only appear after agriculture is fully mature and hierarchy is obvious. Yet the tower does not explain itself. Was it defensive? Was it ritual? Was it connected to water management, flood protection, astronomical observation, social display, or communal identity? Many interpretations have been suggested, and some are more plausible than others, but none can be treated as final. Its power lies partly in that uncertainty. It stands as stone evidence that early settled people could organize labor around projects whose meaning was larger than any single household. The tower also changes how Jericho feels. A village of houses suggests domestic life. A tower suggests a shared horizon. It is a feature people can see, approach, climb, maintain, discuss, fear, or revere. It creates a vertical element in a mostly low-built world. Even if its purpose is practical, its presence is social. It says that the community can act together and that certain structures matter to everyone. In later civilizations, monumental architecture often declares the authority of rulers, gods, or states. At Jericho, the evidence for such institutions is not present in that later form. The tower comes before the obvious machinery of kingship. That makes it more interesting, not less. It suggests that collective building can arise from shared danger, shared ritual, shared memory, or shared identity long before formal power becomes visible. The people of early Jericho live with the consequences of such organization in their daily lives. Building large structures requires decisions about labor, who works, who directs, who provides food while others build, who benefits, who repairs the damage after storms or seasonal wear. These questions are not preserved in writing, but they must have existed in practice. A wall is not only a physical boundary, it is a social demand. It requires agreement, persuasion, obligation, or pressure. It may strengthen community by giving people a common project. It may also expose tensions between households. The first settled life is full of such hidden negotiations. Every shared structure asks people to coordinate beyond the family hearth. Jericho's burials deepen the mystery of place. Like other early Neolithic communities, its inhabitants sometimes bury the dead beneath house floors or in close association with domestic areas. Some skulls are removed, treated, and later plastered in ways that suggest ancestor practices memory or ritual attention to identity. These customs will become more important in the next part of the story, but at Jericho they already show that the settlement is not only an economic arrangement. It is a landscape of the dead and the living woven together. A house is not simply shelter. It may also be an ancestral place. A floor may cover not only earth, but memory. The community's claim to the spring and the mound may be strengthened by those buried within it. Jericho's importance should not be exaggerated into a simple title like the first city, because that phrase can mislead. It is not a city in the later Mesopotamian sense, with writing bureaucracy, temples, markets, and specialized urban classes. it is better understood as one of the earliest and most remarkable large settlements in a world still becoming Neolithic. Its population estimates vary, and scholars remain cautious, but even modest estimates suggest a community much larger and more permanent than the small mobile bands that dominated most of human history. That alone is extraordinary. Jericho shows that people can live densely before the full urban package exists. It shows that the roots of the city are older than the city itself. The settlement also reveals that staying is not a passive condition. Jericho must be made and remade. Mud brick decays, walls slump, floors crack. Food must be gathered, cultivated, processed and stored. Water must be reached. Waste must be managed. Dead must be buried. Children must be fed. Social tensions must be absorbed or resolved. If the wall has a practical function, it must be maintained. If the tower has ritual or communal meaning, that meaning must be renewed through action. Permanence is labour disguised as stability. The ancient mound grows because people repeatedly refuse to let the place vanish back into ordinary ground, and that is why Jericho stands at the centre of this valley's story. It is not the beginning of everything, and it is not a miracle dropped into the desert. It is the visible result of many older habits returning to water, harvesting plants, storing food, building shelters, burying the dead, organizing labor, and treating place as memory. In Jericho, those habits become dense enough to form something unmistakable. The valley has raised people who no longer only follow the seasons, they build against them, they mark the earth, they gather around a spring and create structures that outlast individual lives. Beneath the later legends and ruins, early Jericho remains a startling image of humanity at a threshold not yet urban, no longer simply mobile, standing beside ancient water with stone in hand, learning that a settlement can become powerful enough to be remembered long after its first builders are gone. Beneath the floors, the dead remain close. They are not pushed to distant cemeteries beyond the edge of life, not hidden in remote ground, where daily movement can forget them. In many early settled communities of the Levant, including sites connected to the world that Jericho helps make visible, the dead are placed within or near the spaces of the living. A floor may be smoothed above a grave. A house may be rebuilt over earlier bodies. A skull may be removed, kept plastered, painted, or set apart from the rest of the skeleton. To modern eyes, this can seem unsettling, even macabre. But in the valley, where home is becoming a new human idea, the presence of the dead may be one of the forces that teaches people what home means. The living are no longer only travelling with memory, they are living on top of it. This intimacy between houses and burials is one of the most haunting features of early settled life. In mobile societies, the dead can be treated in many ways, and burial practices are always shaped by culture, belief, landscape, and circumstance. Some ancestors may remain tied to roots, caves, landmarks, or stories. But settlement changes the possibilities. When a group lives repeatedly in the same place, the dead can become part of the architecture of memory. They can be placed under floors, beside walls, near hearths, or within settlement boundaries. Their location is not accidental. It ties human identity to ground with a force that food alone cannot create. A spring feeds the body. A grave feeds belonging. The practice of removing and treating skulls is especially striking. In several pre-pottery Neolithic communities of the Levant, skulls are separated from bodies after burial and then modified with plaster to recreate facial features. Eyes may be indicated with shells or other materials. Surfaces may be shaped, smoothed, and sometimes painted. These are not casual remains. They require time, skill, and attention. At Jericho and other sites, plastered skulls suggest a complex relationship with ancestors. memory identity, and perhaps household continuity, scholars still debate exactly what they mean. They may represent revered ancestors, important individuals, lineage founders, ritual objects, or something closer to a social bond between the living and specific dead. The evidence remains incomplete, and no single explanation fully accounts for the variation across sites. But the care is undeniable. The face matters. A skull by itself is bone, but plaster gives it presence. It restores a kind of personhood, not as a living face, but as a remembered one. The act of shaping features over bone suggests that the dead are not simply gone. They remain available to the community in altered form. They can be seen, handled, displayed, hidden, buried again, or gathered with others. This is a powerful idea in a world where settlement is still new. The living may be using the dead to create continuity, to claim place, to stabilize identity, or to negotiate relationships among households. A plastered skull is both intimate and public, both human and object, both memory and material. It turns ancestry into something that can occupy space. One lesser-known detail is that not every skull receives this treatment. This selectiveness matters. If all the dead were treated the same way, the practice might suggest a universal belief applied equally across the community. But when only some individuals are singled out, questions multiply. Who is chosen? Elders, men, women, founders, ritual specialists, people from particular households, those with special social roles. The answers vary by site and remain debated. The selectiveness may reveal emerging social distinctions, or it may reflect ritual categories that do not match later ideas of rank. It is tempting to read inequality into every difference, but caution is needed. Early settled communities can recognize status ancestry, age, gender, or spiritual importance without yet becoming rigid hierarchies. Still, the dead are clearly not all remembered in the same way. Burial under floors also changes the house. A dwelling becomes more than a shelter against weather. It becomes a container of lineage and memory. The floor people walk on may cover a relative, a founder, or someone whose identity matters to the group. Cooking, sleeping, grinding grain, repairing tools, and raising children take place above the dead. This closeness may seem strange from a later perspective, but it may have made perfect sense in a world where continuity depends on place. The house says that the people living here belong here because others before them are literally part of the ground. The boundary between domestic life and ritual life is not sharp. A hearth, a burial, a storage pit, and a wall can all participate in the same world of meaning. The relationship between the dead and settlement may also shape ideas of ownership or belonging. In societies without written deeds, royal decrees, or legal boundaries, repeated burial can serve as a powerful form of connection. A household that buries its dead beneath a floor has a claim that is emotional, social, and perhaps spiritual. This does not mean private property in the modern sense. The danger of forcing later categories onto early communities is always present. But the link between ancestry and place is ancient and persistent. To leave a house may mean leaving more than walls. It may mean leaving the dead. To rebuild a floor may mean renewing a bond. To disturb a burial may be a serious act. Settlement deepens because memory has weight. There is another possibility more uncomfortable but important. Close burial may help manage tension inside growing communities. As more people live together, social bonds require reinforcement. Ancestor practices can create unity by reminding households of shared origins or obligations. They can also create competition if different groups claim different ancestors or display them in ways that signal prestige. A plastered skull may comfort, but it may also persuade. It may say that a household has depth, legitimacy, or sacred connection. It may help settle disputes or provoke them. The same ritual object can bind a community together and mark divisions within it. What survives in the record suggests a symbolic world rich enough to do both. The dead also remind us that the first settled communities are not only economic experiments. Too often, the story of settlement is reduced to food, grain, goats, storage, calories, population. All of that matters. But humans do not live by calories alone, and they never have. They live within webs of grief, obligation, fear, memory, and hope. A person dies, and the community must decide what to do with the body. In a mobile world, the decision is shaped by movement. In a settled world, the decision can be shaped by architecture. The body can remain near. The skull can be revisited. The face can be remade. The dead can become part of daily space. Such practices reveal a depth of emotional and symbolic life that is easy to underestimate because no words survive. There is strange tenderness in some of these remains. The careful shaping of a face, the placement of shells, for eyes, the smoothing of plaster over bone, the decision to keep a skull after the flesh is gone, these acts require patience. They're not the work of indifference. They show that early villagers are thinking about identity after death in material terms. They are making memory visible. Yet the tenderness may not be simple. The same skull that represents love may also represent authority, fear, obligation, or ritual power. Ancient human feeling is rarely one thing at a time. The evidence does not allow certainty, and scholars still debate the meanings, but the remains make one fact clear. The dead are active in the social imagination of the living. As villages become more established, this relationship with the dead may help people endure the cost of staying. Disease, labour, conflict and scarcity all press against settlement. Why remain when movement has solved problems for most of human history? Food is part of the answer. Water is part of the answer. But the dead may be part of it too. A place filled with ancestors is harder to abandon. A house that holds generations is more than a practical shelter. A settlement where faces of the dead are remade is a settlement that has begun to imagine itself across time. It is no longer only a group of people alive at one moment. It is a community stretching backward. This stretching backward also makes it possible to stretch forward. When people live among the remains of earlier generations, they may begin to build for descendants as well as for themselves. A repaired floor, a maintained wall, a protected spring, a stored harvest, a buried skull, all belong to a new sense of duration. Time becomes thicker. The valley is no longer a sequence of camps fading after departure. It becomes a layered place where past, present, and future press against one another under the same roofs. In that pressure, settled life becomes more than a strategy. It becomes identity. So beneath the floors, the mystery deepens. The first settled humans are not simply learning how to live in houses. They are learning how houses can hold the dead, how memory can be built into mud and stone, how a face can be remade from bone and plaster, and how ancestry can bind people to the earth beneath their feet. The valley raises them through water grain animals and climate, but also through grief. It teaches them that staying means accumulating not only tools and food, but losses. Each burial makes the place heavier. Each remembered face makes return more meaningful. And in that weight, one of the oldest foundations of civilization begins to form the belief that a community is not only the living, but the living and the dead sharing the same ground. A village learns to organize because staying makes disorder harder to escape. In a mobile camp, tensions can sometimes be softened by movement distance, or the temporary nature of a shared place. People can shift camp, split into smaller groups, visit relatives elsewhere, or leave behind the immediate pressure of a crowded living area. But in a settlement, the same faces remain close. The same paths cross each morning. The same storage places hearths work. Areas, walls, and graves continue to demand attention. A neighbour's smoke drifts into another household space. A child breaks a tool that took hours to shape. A dog disturbs a burial. Stored food disappears. Water must be reached by everyone, and not everyone reaches it with the same needs or at the same time. The first villages are not only built from stone, mud, grain, and memory, they are built from negotiation. This is one of the most important consequences of early settled life. Cooperation becomes more constant. Hunter-gatherer societies already cooperate in complex ways, and it would be wrong to imagine that social organization begins with villages. Mobile communities maintain kinship ties, sharing systems, rituals, conflict resolution teaching, marriage networks, and rules about access to resources. But settlement compresses these relationships into a more durable space. People who might once have met seasonally now live close for longer periods. Tasks that once belonged to temporary camps become permanent responsibilities. Houses must be repaired. Food must be processed in large quantities. Stored supplies must be protected. Burials must be respected. Shared spaces must be managed. Large structures such as Jericho's wall and tower require labour beyond a single household. The village becomes a machine made of people, and that machine only works if its parts keep cooperating. Food sharing lies at the centre of this organisation. A successful hunt produces meat that spoils quickly unless processed, and sharing meat helps create obligations and trust. A grain harvest is different. It can be stored, divided, saved, or withheld. This difference does not automatically produce inequality, but it introduces new social possibilities. A household with more stored food may be able to support others in a lean season, gaining respect or influence. A generous feast may strengthen alliances. A carefully guarded reserve may create suspicion. A community may develop expectations about who contributes labour and who receives food when harvests fail. The evidence remains incomplete because rules do not fossilize. But storage changes the moral landscape. It turns food into a question that lasts beyond the meal. Labour also becomes more visible. In a settled community, daily work accumulates in the body and in the ground. Grinding grain is slow and exhausting. Fetching water is constant. Cutting reeds, gathering fuel, repairing roofs, tending children, shaping stone tools, preparing hides, watching animals, cleaning floors, and managing waste all require time. Some tasks may fall more heavily on certain members of the community, though scholars still debate exact divisions of labour in early Neolithic societies. Skeletal remains from later settled populations sometimes show repetitive strain linked to grinding and other hard tasks, reminding us that the village is not a place where life suddenly becomes easy. It is a place where work becomes organized around fixed spaces and recurring needs. The house creates shelter, but it also creates a schedule. The organization of space reflects this new discipline. Houses stand near one another, but not without pattern. Pathways emerge between structures. Open areas may serve as working spaces, gathering places, or zones where food is processed. Storage pits and bins suggest planning. Burials create areas of special meaning or restriction. Refuse zones mark where waste is pushed away from daily life, though never entirely far enough. The settlement becomes a map of social behaviour. People learn where they may walk, where they should not step, where tools are kept, where elders sit, where children play, where food dries, where the dead lie. These rules may never be spoken in the formal way later laws are spoken, but they are learned through correction, habit, and repetition. A village teaches by making people share space. Conflict is almost certainly part of this world, even if its forms are hard to see. Permanent or semi-permanent settlement increases opportunities for friction. More people living together means more disputes over food, labour, marriage, inheritance, ritual responsibilities, access to water, and the use of space. Some conflicts may be settled through kinship and discussion. Some may lead to households moving away. Some may produce violence. Archaeologists find occasional evidence of injury trauma, defensive structures, and social stress in early settled communities across the broader region. Though interpretation must be careful and site-specific, it would be misleading to describe the first villages as constantly violent, but equally misleading to imagine them as untouched by conflict. They are human communities under new pressure, and pressure reveals both cooperation and fracture. Ritual may help hold the village together. Shared ceremonies, feasts, burial practices, ancestor veneration, and special buildings or features can create bonds that practical arrangements alone cannot sustain. When people gather to bury the dead, process a harvest, mark a season, or maintain a communal structure, they are doing more than completing a task. They are reminding themselves that they belong to a shared world. The plastered skulls and special deposits of early Neolithic communities suggest that memory and ritual are deeply woven into settlement life. At some sites in the wider region, large communal structures and symbolic installations show that people are capable of coordinating around meaning as well as survival. What survives in the record suggests that villages are held together not only by food and water, but by stories, ceremonies, and obligations that leave their marks in bone, plaster, stone, and repeated action. Leadership in these communities is difficult to define. There are no kings, no written titles, no palaces, no royal tombs of the later sort. But the absence of kings does not mean the absence of influence. Some individuals may be respected for age, skill, ritual knowledge, hunting, success, memory of the land, generosity, or ability to mediate disputes. Some households may have deeper ancestry in the settlement. Some may control better storage, better labour connections, or stronger exchange ties. Authority may be temporary, situational, and constantly negotiated rather than fixed in an office. Scholars still debate how hierarchical these early villages were. The safest reading is that they occupy a middle ground more socially complex than small mobile camps in some respects, but not yet the stratified societies of later chiefdoms and states. Exchange networks add another layer of organization. Shells from distant coasts, obsidian from volcanic sources, far from some settlements, unusual stones, pigments, and other materials show that early communities are connected beyond their immediate valleys. These objects may travel through direct movement, down the line exchange, marriage ties, seasonal gatherings, or ritual networks. Their presence inside settlements matters because it shows that rooted life does not mean isolation. A village can be fixed in place and still linked to faraway landscapes. Exotic materials may carry beauty, status, memory, or sacred significance. They also create relationships. To receive something from far away is to be part of a wider human web. The first settled communities are local, but their horizons are not small. Ownership too begins to change, though cautiously. In a mobile world, people can own tools, ornaments, clothing, weapons, and knowledge, but land and structures often carry different meanings depending on the society. In a settled village, houses, storage places, and buried ancestors create stronger associations between particular groups and particular spaces. A family may be linked to a house through use, repair, and burial. A storage pit may be guarded by those who filled it. A wall may belong to everyone because everyone depends on it. The line between private and communal is likely fluid, negotiated through custom rather than written law. No single explanation fully accounts for how property emerges, but the early village creates the conditions in which ownership becomes harder to avoid. The village also reorganizes childhood. Children born into settled communities experience the world differently from children raised in highly mobile groups. Their first memories may include walls, floors, repeated paths, stored food, domestic animals, graves, and a stable circle of neighboring households. They learn by watching adults grind, build, cook, harvest, repair, and negotiate. They play near the same structures year after year. They know the spring not as one stop among many, but as the centre of life. This matters because settlement is not only maintained by adults who choose it, it is reproduced by children who grow up treating it as normal. After a few generations, the village is no longer an experiment. It is the world. Still beneath the appearance of stability, everything remains fragile. A failed harvest, a dried spring, a disease outbreak, a feud, or a shift in animal movement can threaten the entire arrangement. The first villages survive because they organize, but they also organize because survival has become more complicated. They must hold people together without the later tools of bureaucracy, writing police taxes, or kingship. They rely on kinship memory, obligation, ritual habit, persuasion, and the powerful fact that everyone has invested too much to walk away easily. The valley has taught them to stay, but staying now teaches them politics in its earliest, most human form. This is the quiet birth of community as a built condition. Not merely people travelling together, not merely families sharing a camp, but households arranged around durable places, common risks, shared labour remembered dead, and resources that must be managed over time. The first settled humans do not yet build states, but they begin to face the problems from which states will one day grow. How to feed many people in one place, how to settle disputes, how to organize labor, how to remember the dead, how to defend or maintain what is shared, how to decide who belongs. In the ancient valley, long before crowns and written laws, the village becomes a rehearsal for civilization, and every repaired wall, open storage pit, and negotiated quarrel adds another line to a script. Humanity is still following. The hidden costs of staying begin quietly in places no monument records. They begin in the ache of knees against hard floors, in the dust of ground grain caught between teeth, in the smell of refuse that cannot simply be left behind in the insects breeding near stored food, in the cough that passes from one crowded house to another, in the argument over a basket that should have lasted until the next harvest. The first settled communities are often remembered as the beginning of progress, and in many ways they are. They make possible new forms of memory cooperation, architecture, ritual, and food production. But the valley does not raise settled humans by giving them an easy life. It raises them through a bargain, and the price of that bargain is written into bodies as much as into stone. For most of human existence, movement helps solve problems that settlement traps in place. A camp becomes dirty and people move. Game grows scarce and people follow new routes. Social tension builds and groups can separate for a season. Water fails and survival depends on knowing another source. Settled life weakens some of these escape routes. A village can be abandoned, and many early settlements likely were abandoned or shifted when conditions demanded it. But abandonment becomes more costly once houses, storage fields, graves, and social networks are fixed to one place. The longer people stay, the more they accumulate advantages, but also waste parasites, obligations, and risk. Permanence is not merely stability. It is accumulation, and accumulation can turn against the people who create it. Disease is one of the most important hidden costs. Small mobile groups can suffer illness, injury, parasites, and infection, but dense settlement changes the ecology of sickness. More people living close together means pathogens have more bodies to move through. Waste gathers near domestic spaces. Water sources become shared by humans, animals, and pests. Stored food attracts rodents. Dogs and later managed herds bring humans into closer contact with animals and their microbes. The full burden of major epidemic diseases belongs more clearly to later larger populations with domesticated animals and extensive networks, but the foundations of that new disease environment are laid in early villages. A settlement is not just a home for humans. It is an invitation to every organism that thrives on human proximity. The archaeological record cannot diagnose every cough, fever, or infection, but skeletal remains, settlement debris, and later patterns all point toward a general truth staying changes health. Some early farming and settled populations show signs of nutritional stress, dental disease, and physical strain. The timing and severity vary by region, and scholars still debate how quickly health declined or improved in different communities. Still, the old assumption that agriculture immediately made life better has long been challenged. A broader diet of wild resources can sometimes be healthier than a narrower diet heavy in cereals. Grain fills stomachs, but dependence on it can reduce dietary diversity. It can also increase tooth wear and cavities, especially when ground flour contains tiny stone particles from grinding tools. The meal that keeps a village alive can slowly damage the mouths that eat it. Labour leaves its own marks. Grinding grain day after day is not a minor chore. It is a demanding physical practice, often carried out for long hours, and in later settled communities it is frequently associated with repetitive stress in shoulders, arms, knees, and spine. Carrying water, collecting fuel, plastering floors, repairing walls, harvesting plants, tending animals, and cleaning domestic spaces all create cycles of work that do not end when a hunt is successful or a season changes. Mobile life is also hard, often extremely hard, but its demands are distributed differently across landscape and time. Settled life concentrates labour around fixed tasks. The house protects, but it also commands. The storage pit reassures, but it also demands filling. The field or managed plant patch promises food, but only after weeks and months of attention. There is a surprising irony here. Settlement is sometimes imagined as the moment humans gain control over nature, yet early villages may become more tightly controlled by seasonal demands than many mobile foragers. Wild resources require knowledge and movement, but cultivated or intensively managed plants require punctuality. Grain must be harvested when ready, not when convenient. Fields must be watched. Stored food must be protected. Animals must be watered and guarded. A community tied to these cycles cannot simply drift away without consequence. The more people reshape the valley, the more the reshaped valley reshapes them. Control becomes dependence wearing another face. Crowding brings social costs as well. A growing village allows more cooperation, more exchange, more marriage possibilities, more shared ritual and stronger defense or maintenance of place, but it also multiplies friction. People hear one another, smell one another, depend on one another, and resent one another. Disputes over labour, food, marriage, ancestry, burial rites, and access to space may become harder to dissolve. A mobile group can split and reunite. A village must manage repeated contact. The evidence remains incomplete because anger rarely fossilizes unless it becomes injury or destruction. But the social logic is clear. Where humans live close together, they need stronger customs, stronger obligations, and perhaps stronger pressures to conform. The village creates community, but community can comfort and constrain at the same time. Inequality may also begin to take root in small ways. It does not appear fully formed, and it would be misleading to imagine early settlements already divided into rich and poor as later cities are. Many early villages may have been relatively egalitarian compared with later agricultural societies, yet the conditions for inequality are quietly emerging. Some households may store more grain, some may have better access to labour, some may claim deeper ancestral ties to a house or plot. Some individuals may gain influence through ritual knowledge exchange connections, hunting, success, healing skill, or the ability to organise communal work. Differences that once remained temporary can become more durable when attached to houses, graves, and stored goods. A basket of grain can disappear into a meal, but a household's advantage can carry into the next season. Children too live differently under settlement. More stable food supplies may allow shorter intervals between births in some communities, contributing to population growth. A settled household can care for multiple young children without the same burden of carrying them over long distances, though childcare remains demanding. Population growth can strengthen a village, but it also increases pressure on land, water, food, and social relationships. More children mean more future workers, but also more immediate mouths. The success of staying creates the need for more food, and the need for more food encourages deeper cultivation. This feedback loop is one of the powerful engines of the Neolithic world. It does not require anyone to plan a revolution. It grows from the intimate arithmetic of survival. The environment around settlements changes as well. Fuel gathering can strip nearby wood. Grazing and browsing animals can alter vegetation. Repeated trampling compacts soil. Human waste enriches some patches and contaminates others. Cleared ground favours certain plants over others. Hunting pressure can affect local animal populations. In the beginning, these impacts may be limited, but as settlement grows, humans become a stronger ecological force. The valley is no longer only shaping people. People are reshaping the valley. This transformation is neither entirely destructive nor entirely beneficial. It creates new habitats, encourages useful plants, supports animals that thrive near humans, and opens space for cultivation. But it also marks the beginning of a relationship in which survival depends on managing the consequences of human success. No single explanation fully accounts for why people accept these costs. They may not experience them as a single bargain at all. They inherit a way of life, adapt to immediate pressures, and make choices within the world available to them. A family does not compare all of human history and decide whether settlement is worth it. It decides whether to repair this roof guard, this store plant, or scatter these seeds, remain near this spring, bury this relative beneath this floor, and endure this difficult season in the hope that the next one will be kinder. History is built from such decisions, each practical, each limited, each carrying consequences no one can fully see. The hidden costs of staying make the achievement of early settlement more impressive, not less. These communities are not simply lucky people living in fertile places. They are people managing new dangers created by their own success. They face disease labour, crowding, dependence, environmental strain, and the first shadows of inequality, yet they continue to build, repair, store, remember, and return. The valley raises them through opportunity, but it also hardens them through compromise. The first settled humans do not step into a paradise. They step into a more complicated world, one where home gives shelter and demands payment, where grain gives security and demands labour, where ancestors give belonging and bind people to place, where the future becomes richer and heavier at the same time. From that weight, the next stage of human history begins to gather force. Beyond one valley, the same human restlessness is taking different forms. The Jordan Valley is central to this story because it gathers water routes, wild grain, ancient settlements, and memory into one powerful corridor. But it does not stand alone like a single cradle from which everything simply spreads. The deeper truth is wider and more interesting. Across the Fertile Crescent from the Levantine hills to northern Mesopotamia, from Anatolia's uplands to the Zagros Mountains, communities are experimenting with cultivating, building, remembering and managing animals in their own ways. Some live near springs, some live near seasonal streams, some occupy upland zones where wild cereals and herd animals are close at hand. Some gather in ritual centres before ordinary villages become fully established. Some move between settlement and mobility with a flexibility that later categories cannot easily hold. The ancient valley helps raise the first settled humans, but the wider region shows that settlement is not a single invention. It is conversation across landscapes. This matters because the old story often searches for one beginning, one birthplace, one first farmer, one spark. But archaeology rarely rewards such simplicity. The evidence remains incomplete, and every new excavation can sharpen or complicate the picture. What survives across the Fertile Crescent suggests a patchwork of related but distinct developments. In some areas, plants come first in the record. In others, architecture or ritual seems unusually prominent. In some places, people remain mobile while using cultivated or managed resources. In others, permanent houses appear before full domestication is clear. Domesticated wheat, barley, lentils, peas, chickpeas, goats, sheep, pigs, and cattle. Each have their own histories, and those histories do not all begin at the same exact time or place. The Neolithic world is not a straight line, it is a braid. To the north, in the upper reaches of Mesopotamia and southeastern Anatolia, the story takes on a strikingly different shape. Here, in landscapes of rolling hills, limestone ridges and seasonal abundance, early communities build impressive communal structures, some with carved pillars and symbolic imagery long before cities, kings and writing. Sites such as Göbekli Tepe and nearby settlements show that ritual gathering and monumental construction are not late luxuries that appear only after farming creates surplus. They may be part of the process that draws people together in the first place. This is one of the most surprising reversals in modern archaeology. For a long time, many assumed that people farmed, first produced surplus, settled down, and only then built great ritual places. The evidence from parts of Anatolia suggests a more tangled sequence. People may gather for ceremony, feasting, labor, memory, and identity, and those gatherings may help create the social pressure that makes food production more necessary. This does not mean temples invented farming as some popular versions claim too confidently. That would be too simple. But it does mean that belief ritual and social performance cannot be treated as decorations added after the practical work of survival is complete. Humans are meaning-making animals from the beginning. If groups gather seasonally at powerful places, they need food to feed participants. If feasts become important grain, and animals become socially valuable. If large structures require labor, communities need systems for organizing people and provisioning workers. In this way, ritual can intensify economic change without being the only cause. No single explanation fully accounts for the evidence, but the northern sites make one thing clear. The road to settlement passes through imagination as well as hunger. Farther east, in the Zagros Mountains and adjacent regions, another strand of the story develops around animals and upland resources. Goats are especially important in discussions of early domestication there, though the process is complex and spread across multiple zones. Mountain landscapes create different opportunities from the Jordan Valley. They offer seasonal pastures, wild caprines, varied elevations and routes that encourage movement as well as settlement. Communities in such places may begin managing animals through close knowledge of herds, selective hunting and gradual control over breeding. The signs of domestication appear in bone size, age and sex patterns, horn changes and the growing presence of animals whose lives are increasingly shaped by human decisions. Here again, settlement is not simply about planting grain beside a spring. It is about learning to guide living populations through time. Northern Mesopotamia adds another set of possibilities. Along river systems and rain-fed zones, early villages develop in environments where cereal cultivation can become increasingly productive. Houses become more substantial, communities grow, long-distance exchange links expand. Obsidian from volcanic regions travels far from its source, appearing in settlements where it must have arrived through trade movement or social networks. Such materials reveal that early villages are not isolated pockets of invention. Ideas, tools, seeds, animals, ornaments, and people move. A village may be rooted in one place, but its relationships stretch outward across hundreds of kilometers. The spread of Neolithic life is not only migration and not only imitation. It is contact adaptation, marriage exchange, borrowing, and local reinvention. The Levant itself is not uniform either. The Jordan Valley, the Mediterranean coast, the hill country, the steppe margins, and the desert edge, each shape human choices differently. In wetter areas, wild plants may be more abundant. In drier zones, springs and seasonal water sources become critical. Along coasts, shells and marine foods enter the story. In uplands, woodlands and game create different rhythms. The same broad cultural transition looks different depending on where people stand. This is why the phrase Fertile Crescent can mislead if it is imagined as one smooth, fertile band. It is really a chain of ecological opportunities, each with its own dangers. The genius of early communities lies in adapting shared possibilities to local realities. The movement of domesticated plants and animals across these regions is one of the great transformations of the early Holocene. Wheat and barley varieties that first become domesticated in particular zones do not remain there. Goats and sheep move into new landscapes. Knowledge of cultivation spreads, but as it spreads, it changes. A plant that thrives in one valley must be tested in another. A herd managed in one upland pattern must adapt to different pasture and water. People carry seeds, but they also carry habits: when to sow, when to harvest, how to store, how to grind, how to organize labor, how to divide food, how to remember the dead, how to build houses. The Neolithic package, as it is sometimes called, is not a package at the beginning. It becomes one later assembled from many separate experiments. There is a lesser-known human dimension in this spreading world. Not everyone adopts the new way at the same pace, and not everyone may want it. Mobile foragers settled, cultivators, herders, and mixed communities likely coexist for long periods. They may trade, intermarry, compete, imitate, avoid, or misunderstand one another. The boundary between farmer and hunter-gatherer is often more porous than later histories suggest. A community can cultivate some plants and still hunt intensively. A mobile group can use pottery or exchange for grain. A village can send herders out seasonally. People can shift strategies when climate conflict or opportunity changes. The evidence remains incomplete, but it points toward a world of flexibility rather than a simple replacement of one way of life by another. As these experiments connect, consequences multiply. Larger settlements require more stable food supplies. More food supports more people. More people require more land, more labor, and stronger social rules. Exchange networks carry useful materials but also expectations and perhaps tensions. Ritual practices spread or transform. Ancestor traditions appear in different forms. House architecture changes from round to rectangular in many areas, allowing denser settlement and new household arrangements. Storage becomes more central. Domesticated animals alter landscapes through grazing and dung. Cultivated plants adapt genetically to human harvesting and sowing. The human world begins to thicken across the Fertile Crescent, not as an empire or civilization, but as a network of villages, paths, fields, herds, memories, and obligations. The Jordan Valley remains one of the key corridors within that network. Its position between Africa and Asia desert and highland river and spring makes it a route as much as a home. People, animals, and ideas can move along it, and the communities rooted there are never entirely separate from the broader transformation. Jericho's tower Natufian settlements, ancestor skulls, grain processing, and water-centered life all belong to a wider story unfolding across neighboring lands. The valley is not diminished by this wider view. It becomes more important because it shows one powerful local version of a regional human awakening. It is one voice in a chorus, but its voice is deep. Beyond one valley, then, the first settled humans are being raised by many teachers. Springs teach return, grasslands teach harvest, mountains teach herding, ritual centers teach cooperation, exchange routes teach connection, scarcity teaches planning, abundance teaches gathering, death teaches memory. No one landscape explains everything, and no single theory can hold all the evidence without strain. But together these places reveal a species changing its relationship with Earth. Humans are no longer only moving through ecosystems, they are beginning to make ecosystems of their own. The ancient valley is part of that wider transformation, and its story flows outward like water from a spring joining other streams until the first villages of the Fertile Crescent become the source of a current that will one day carry cities, kingdoms, and the long unfinished experiment of civilization. The valley endures because it is more than a fertile place. Fertility alone does not explain its long hold on human life. Many landscapes can produce food in good years, then fail when weather shifts. Many rivers invite settlement, then flood too violently or wander too widely. Many plains offer space but little protection. The ancient Jordan Valley and its surrounding lands hold a rarer combination: dependable pockets of water, sharp ecological variety, natural corridors of movement, access to wild plants and animals, and a depth of memory built by repeated human return. It is not paradise. It is too dry in places, too hot in others, too exposed at times, too unpredictable to be reduced to an easy cradle. But its very complexity makes it powerful. It gives people reasons to stay, reasons to move, reasons to meet, and reasons to come back after leaving. That is the foundation of endurance. The first reason is water, because in this region water is never just a resource, it is structure. Springs, rivers, seasonal streams, marshes and lakes decide where plants gather, where animals pause, where people camp, where paths converge, and where memory thickens. A reliable spring in a dry zone is a center of gravity. It can support repeated occupation even when the surrounding land becomes difficult. It allows people to plan. It draws reeds, birds, insects, game, and useful plants. It can make cultivation more secure and settlement more defensible against hunger. Yet water also creates dependence. A community tied to a spring must watch it, protect access to it, and share or contest it with others. The spring is generous, but it is also a point of pressure. Around such pressure, social life becomes more organized. The valley's second strength is its ecological closeness. Within a relatively short distance, people can move from low hot lands to cooler slopes, from wetlands to dry steppe, from grain-bearing hills to river banks, from wooded pockets to open hunting grounds. This vertical and horizontal variety matters enormously. It creates resilience. If one resource fails, another may remain. If grain is poor in one zone, nuts, game fish or plants elsewhere may help carry people through. The valley is not a single basket into which all hope must be placed. It is a set of overlapping baskets, and early humans are skilled at knowing when each might be full. What survives in the record suggests that this ability to combine resources helps some communities stay longer without becoming immediately trapped by one fragile food source. The third reason is movement. A valley can raise settled humans not by ending movement, but by directing it. The Jordan Valley is part of a great corridor running through the Levant linking Africa, Arabia, the Mediterranean world, Anatolia, Mesopotamia, and the deeper interior. For countless generations, hominins and humans has moved through the broader region. Later animals, seeds, obsidian shells, ideas, technologies, and rituals also travel along networks that touch this corridor. Settlement here does not mean isolation from the world. It means becoming a fixed point inside movement. A spring settlement can receive travelers. A village can exchange goods. A ritual place can draw visitors. A burial ground can become known beyond one household. The valley endures because it allows both rootedness and connection. This combination helps explain why places like Jericho can be occupied, abandoned, and reoccupied across enormous spans of time. A mound grows not because life is uninterrupted forever, but because the same place remains meaningful enough for people to return after breaks. Archaeological tells are made of repetition. Houses collapse and are levelled. New floors are laid above old ones. Hearths are remade. Burials cut into earlier deposits. Walls rise over the remains of previous walls. Over time, the settlement becomes literally higher, a hill built from human persistence. This is one of the most striking physical images of endurance in the ancient Near East, a landscape where human memory becomes topography. The mound itself is a fossil of return. The valley also endures because it teaches adaptation without offering complete security. In places where life is too easy, there may be less pressure to innovate. In places where life is too harsh, innovation may not be enough. The Jordan Valley often sits between those extremes. It can support abundance, but not carelessly. It rewards careful timing, storage, social cooperation, and environmental knowledge. It encourages people to manage risk. A community may hunt, gather, cultivate, store, exchange, and move seasonally, all within one broader system. This flexibility is one reason early settlement can take root. The people do not abandon every older strategy at once. They layer new practices onto old ones. They remain hunters while becoming cultivators. They remain gatherers while building houses. They remain mobile in some rhythms while becoming attached to fixed places. Endurance comes from mixture. Another reason the valley matters is that it stands at a boundary between wild abundance and human management. Wild cereals, legumes, fruits, nuts, and animals do not automatically produce farming or herding. But when they exist near water, near repeated camps, and within a landscape where people already know how to store, process, and return, they become candidates for deeper involvement. The valley gives humans the chance to intensify relationships that already exist. People do not invent plants. They begin to favor, move, protect, and depend on particular plants. They do not invent animals. They begin to tolerate, follow, capture, manage, and breed particular animals. Domestication grows from closeness, and the valley creates closeness again and again. There is also a ritual durability in the landscape. The same cliffs, springs, caves, stones, and burial places can gather meaning over generations. Early settled communities do not leave written myths to explain these places, but their treatment of the dead, their plastered skulls, their repeated burials, their special structures, and their careful deposits suggest that the landscape is not merely economic. It is charged with memory. A place where ancestors are buried becomes different from ordinary ground. A spring that sustains a community through drought may become more than water. A mound where earlier houses lie beneath later floors becomes a material link to those who came before. The evidence remains incomplete, but it points toward a world where survival and meaning cannot be separated. This helps explain why settlement is so difficult to reverse once it deepens. A community may leave for a season, or even for generations, but the place remains marked. The dead remain, the old stones remain, the spring remains. Stories may remain even when structures decay. Later people may not remember the original builders, but they recognize the usefulness or significance of the location. They rebuild, reuse, reinterpret. Human landscapes are inherited in this way. One group's practical decision becomes another group's sacred ground, another group's ruin, another group's foundation. The valley endures because it can absorb and preserve these layers without needing any one culture to remain forever. The long-term importance of the valley is also tied to its role as a meeting zone. Different ways of life can encounter one another here: foragers, cultivators, herders, traders, pilgrims, migrants, and later armies and states. In the earlier settled period, these encounters may be small and personal, carried through marriage ties, shared feasts, exchange of shells or stone, or seasonal gatherings. Over time, the same corridor will become part of much larger historical movements, but the underlying pattern is already present. The valley is never only local. Its geography invites contact. Contact brings novelty, tension, disease, knowledge, prestige, goods, and new habits. Enduring places are often those that can receive change without losing their basic reason for being. Still, the valley's endurance should not be mistaken for stability. It changes constantly. Climate shifts. Water levels rise and fall. Plants move. Animals decline or flourish. Settlements grow, shrink, burn empty, and return. What endures is not one unbroken society, but a recurring human attraction to the same possibilities. The valley remains important because it repeatedly offers combinations that humans can use: water in dry country movement through difficult terrain, ecological diversity, memory in the ground, and symbolic weight. It is less like a cradle that holds one infant civilization and more like a long school in which different generations learn different lessons from the same demanding teacher. No single explanation fully accounts for why this valley becomes so central. Its springs matter, but springs alone do not create villages. Its wild grain matters, but grain alone does not create settlement. Its corridor position matters, but movement alone does not create rootedness. Its burial traditions matter, but memory alone does not feed children. The valley's power lies in the combination. It is where water, food, movement, pressure, memory, and human imagination meet closely enough to reinforce one another. That is why it can raise settled humans before cities exist. That is why it can keep drawing people back long after the first stone houses crumble. In the deepest sense, the valley endures because it teaches humans how to belong to a place without completely ceasing to move. It teaches them to carry old foraging intelligence into new settled life. It teaches them that a house can stand beside a root, that a grave can anchor a family near a spring, that a stored harvest can make tomorrow visible, that a settlement can be both refuge and trap. Its lesson is not simple comfort. Its lesson is continuity under pressure. In that lesson lies the reason the valley's early settlements still matter. They are not only traces of a remote past, they are the beginning of a pattern repeated across human history. People gathering where life is possible, investing labour until the ground remembers them and calling that remembered ground home. The mystery of first settlement remains difficult because every simple answer breaks against the evidence. Climate matters, but climate alone cannot explain why some groups settle deeply while others continue moving. Grain matters, but people gather plants long before they become farmers. Population pressure matters, but pressure can push people apart as easily as it pulls them together. Ritual matters, but ritual needs food, labor, and social agreement to endure. Abundance matters, but abundance can support mobility without forcing houses into the ground. Scarcity matters, but too much scarcity destroys settlements before they can grow. The ancient valley sits at the center of these competing explanations, not because it solves the mystery neatly, but because it shows how many forces can converge in one landscape until human life begins to change direction. For a long time, one of the most persuasive explanations was practical and environmental. As the Ice Age ends, the climate becomes warmer in many places, plants expand, wild cereals become more available, and humans take advantage of new abundance. In this view, settled life begins because the land becomes generous enough to support it. There is truth here. Without the valleys, springs, wetlands, grain-bearing slopes, animal roots, and ecological variety, longer residence would have been much harder. A group cannot settle where food and water cannot be made reliable enough. The environment opens possibilities, but abundance alone does not force settlement. Many rich environments support mobile foraging for thousands of years. People can live well by moving through plenty. So the question remains, why does abundance in this region become an anchor rather than simply another stop along a seasonal path? The opposite explanation points towards stress. The Younger Dryas and other climatic disruptions may have made old foraging patterns less reliable, pushing people toward cultivation, storage, and tighter control of food. This also has force. The timing of environmental stress overlaps with crucial changes, and scarcity can make experimentation urgent. If wild grain patches shrink or become unpredictable, protecting sowing or managing plants becomes more attractive. If people are already living near springs and burial grounds, they may choose to intensify local resources rather than return fully to wide mobility. Yet stress alone cannot be the whole answer either. Too much hardship leads to abandonment, migration, or collapse. Settlement requires enough reliability to survive the experiment. The valley works not as a simple refuge from crisis, but as a place where crisis and opportunity exist close together. Another explanation focuses on population. As conditions improve and food resources become denser, human numbers may rise. More people place more pressure on wild resources, forcing communities to intensify production. More children can be supported in settled homes because families no longer need to carry everything across long distances. Population growth then creates a feedback loop. More people require more food. More food encourages cultivation. Cultivation supports more people, and larger communities become harder to sustain without further intensification. This explanation helps clarify why the shift once begun becomes difficult to reverse. But here too the evidence remains incomplete. Population is hard to measure directly in deep prehistory. Larger settlements suggest more people, but whether growth causes settlement or settlement causes growth can be difficult to untangle. The answer is likely both feeding into one another over generations. Food storage offers another key. The ability to preserve grain makes staying more secure, and staying makes storage more necessary. A store of seeds, nuts, or dried food allows a group to survive lean weeks, host gatherings, support children, and remain near houses and graves. Storage also makes inequality obligation and planning more durable. It shifts attention from immediate return to delayed use. But storage is not only a solution, it is also a problem. Stored food must be guarded from pests, moisture theft, and social conflict. It ties people to place because leaving means abandoning reserves or carrying heavy loads. A basket hidden in a house becomes a reason to return. A pit of grain becomes a quiet argument against movement. Storage does not explain everything, but it changes the cost of every decision. Then there is ritual, one of the most powerful and most difficult forces to measure. Early settled communities of the Levant and neighbouring regions invest extraordinary care in burials, plastered skulls, special structures, symbolic objects and communal spaces. In northern regions, monumental ritual sites suggest that gathering for meaning may have helped draw people into larger, more organised communities even before farming was fully established. This challenges the idea that practical food production always comes first, and belief follows later. Humans gather for reasons that are not reducible to hunger. They gather to remember, mourn, marry, feast, display, negotiate, and belong. A place of ritual can become a place where food demand rises. A place where ancestors are buried can become harder to leave. A place where ceremonies recur can become a settlement almost by repetition. Still, ritual cannot float above material life. A large gathering must be fed. A burial tradition must be supported by people who remain close enough to maintain it. A communal structure must be built by bodies with time, strength, and food. The symbolic and the practical are braided together. A feast may be religious and political and economic at once. A plastered skull may express grief, ancestry, household identity, and territorial belonging at the same time. Modern categories separate these things too sharply. Early villagers likely experienced them as one woven world. The spring feeds the body, but it may also gather memory. The grain fills the stomach, but it may also support ceremony. The house shelters the living, but it may also hold the dead. The mystery of settlement survives partly because the causes are not separate in human life. Social competition may also play a role. As groups gather more often and settlements grow, households or lineages may compete through generosity, feasting, burial, display, exchange goods, or control of labour. Competition does not need kings or wealth in the later sense. It can begin with prestige, reputation, and obligation. A family that hosts a feast must gather or store more food. A group that builds a communal feature must mobilize labour. A household associated with respected ancestors may gain influence. Such pressures can encourage greater production, larger gatherings, and more permanent occupation. What survives in the record suggests that early communities are not flat collections of identical families, yet it remains difficult to define their social differences precisely. The first roots of hierarchy may be present, but not yet hardened into the institutions of later civilization. Accident and habit deserve attention as well. History is not always made by conscious plans. People return to a spring because it worked last year. They repair a shelter because it is easier than building elsewhere. They scatter seeds near camp because waste falls there. They bury a loved one under a floor because the place matters. They keep a heavy grinding stone because moving it is impractical. Over generations, practical habits accumulate into a new way of life. No one needs to decide to create settled society. They only need to make one reasonable choice after another, each choice slightly increasing attachment to place. The mystery of settlement may feel less like a single cause and more like a trap made of useful decisions. This is why the phrase agricultural revolution can mislead. The transformation is revolutionary in its consequences, but not necessarily in its experience. For the people inside it, change may feel gradual, reversible, even ordinary. One generation stays longer than its grandparents. Another builds more durable houses. Another relies more heavily on cultivated grain. Another keeps animals closer. Another grows up knowing the settlement as the centre of the world. By the time the shift becomes obvious in the archaeological record, the inner crossing may already be complete. People are not suddenly converted from wandering to farming. They are slowly educated by repetition. No single explanation fully accounts for this because settlement is not one thing. It is food strategy, architecture, memory, labor, health, risk, social pressure, ritual, identity, environmental opportunity, and demographic change all unfolding together. The valley's greatness lies in making these forces meet. Its water gives permanence a chance. Its wild grain gives labor a reward. Its animals give hunting and management a bridge. Its climate swings give urgency. Its corridors give connection. Its burial places give belonging. Its houses give memory walls and floors. Any one of these might not be enough. Together they create a world in which staying becomes thinkable, then useful, then meaningful, then difficult to abandon. The mystery, therefore, is not why humans suddenly chose to settle, as if all humanity gathered around a single decision. The mystery is how a species so successful at movement became increasingly willing to accept the burdens of place. The answer is not a single discovery, but a convergence. The first settled humans are raised by a valley that offers enough to invite them with holds, enough to challenge them, and remembers enough to bind them. They do not leave the old world behind in one dramatic break. They carry it with them into houses, fields, graves, and stored harvests. And somewhere in that long crossing, the human future changes shape not because one cause triumphs, but because many small causes begin to pull in the same direction. The valley still lies beneath us even when modern life seems to have left it far behind. It lies beneath the streets of cities, beneath the idea of a family home, beneath fields divided by boundaries, beneath the habit of storing food for seasons not yet arrived, beneath the quiet assumption that people belong somewhere because they're dead, their labor and their memories are rooted there. The first settled humans of the ancient valley do not build skyscrapers, write laws, mint coins, or raise armies. They do not know the names of later civilizations. They do not imagine the long road from springside houses to crowded capitals, from wild grain to global agriculture, from plastered skulls to written genealogies, from shared labor on stone walls to states that command millions. Yet the shape of that future is already beginning around them. It begins in the decision to remain. The legacy of these early settlements is not a straight line from Jericho to modern civilization, as if one valley alone produces everything that follows. Human history is never that tidy. Other regions of the world will develop farming settlement and complex societies independently, or through their own long exchanges of plants, animals, climates, and cultures. The first settled worlds of the Fertile Crescent are one great beginning among several. But they are among the earliest and most influential, and the valley's role remains profound. From the Levant and neighbouring regions, domesticated plants, animals building traditions and village ways of life, spread, transform and combine with local practices across wider landscapes. Wheat and barley become more than regional foods. Sheep and goats become companions of human expansion. Houses become compounds. Villages become towns. Towns become cities. The quiet experiments of the valley become part of a much larger human inheritance. What begins as settlement eventually changes the scale of possibility. A mobile band can possess deep wisdom, art, social complexity, and rich spiritual life, but a permanent village creates a different kind of accumulation. Tools accumulate, stored food accumulates, buildings accumulate, ancestors accumulate. Knowledge becomes attached to place and can be passed down through repeated practice in the same fields, houses, and workspaces. Children learn not only from stories but from built surroundings that already contain instructions. A path to water shows where generations have walked. A wall shows where labor was invested before a child was born. A field shows where seed should return. A burial under a floor shows that the past is not elsewhere. This accumulation makes later complexity possible, though it also makes later burdens possible. The same valley that teaches humans to stay also helps create the conditions for hierarchy, conflict, and dependence. This is part of its legacy too. It would be comforting to draw a clean line between a peaceful early village and a violent later city, but history does not divide itself so neatly. The roots of cooperation and inequality grow in the same soil. Shared labor can build a wall for everyone, but it can also teach some people how to direct the work of others. Storage can protect a community from famine, but it can also become a source of control. Ancestor memory can create belonging, but it can also support claims of rank territory or exclusion. Settlement gives humans extraordinary power over food and place, but it also creates new ways for humans to hold power over one another. The evidence remains incomplete for the earlier stages, yet the later pattern is unmistakable enough to cast a long shadow backward. Still, the legacy should not be reduced to loss. The first settled communities also create forms of care that are difficult to imagine without place. They create durable homes where children can grow among familiar people and familiar ground. They create storage that can feed the vulnerable through lean times. They create shared ritual spaces where grief, memory, and identity can be carried across generations. They create the possibility of craft specialization deeper, local knowledge, long-term architecture, and eventually written history. They create landscapes in which human beings can invest not only survival effort, but meaning. A village can become oppressive, but it can also become shelter. A field can become dependence, but it can also become promise. A burial beneath a floor can bind a family to grief, but it can also say that no life vanishes entirely from the place that held it. In the centuries and millennia after the earlier settled experiments, the Neolithic world expands and changes. Rectangular houses become more common in many regions, allowing denser arrangements and more complex household spaces. Pottery eventually appears and transforms cooking, storage, and daily practice. Farming becomes more reliable in some places and more demanding in others. Herd animals become central to economy, ritual, and movement. Villages grow, split, disappear, and reappear. Some settlements are abandoned for reasons that remain debated. Climate shifts, resource exhaustion, conflict, disease, social tension, or simple movement toward better opportunities. No single explanation fully accounts for the rise and fall of early communities, but the broader direction is clear. The human relationship with place has changed permanently. The ancient valley's traces survive not because its earliest people speak to us directly, but because their actions enter the ground. Stone foundations remain after walls decay. Plaster fragments survive after faces disappear. Seeds char in hearths and become evidence. Bones preserve meals, herds, disease, and death. Grinding stones hold the polish of repeated labor. Mounds rise where generations build over generations. Archaeologists read these traces carefully, knowing that every interpretation is partial. The record is rich but not complete. The people themselves remain just beyond reach. Their languages are gone, their songs are gone, their names are gone. Yet the pattern of their lives survives strongly enough to show that they were not passive figures at the edge of progress. They were decision-makers inside uncertainty. Their world is distant, but it is not alien. The concerns that gather around those early houses remain recognizable. Food, water, children, illness, memory, work, conflict, belonging, fear of hunger, hope for next season, respect for the dead, suspicion of neighbours, pride in a repaired home relief when storage holds grief when it does not. The tools are different, the house is smaller, the language lost, but the human pressures are familiar. That is why the valley still speaks. It shows the beginning of a pattern that modern people inhabit every day, often without noticing. To live in one place is to trust that tomorrow will return to the same ground. To store food is to imagine future need. To bury the dead nearby is to let memory shape space. To build a wall is to admit that shelter and boundary are part of the same act. The valley still beneath us is therefore not only geographical, it is psychological and social. It is the hidden layer under the modern idea of home. Every city, however vast, begins with the older question of how many people can live together without breaking apart. Every farm begins with the older gamble of placing seed into soil and waiting. Every nation's boundary echoes in distant form the first repeated claims around water burial and useful land. Every household pantry carries a faint memory of the first stored grain. Every cemetery memorial and ancestral story reflects the same need that once placed the dead beneath floors and remade faces in plaster. The ancient valley has not disappeared. It has widened into human life, and perhaps this is the deepest legacy settlement teaches humans to think beyond the immediate horizon. It teaches them that the future can be prepared for, that the past can be held in place, that labour can outlast the body that performs it. This ability will make civilization possible. It will also make civilization fragile, because everything built across time can be lost across time. Fields fail, springs dry, walls collapse, communities fracture, cities vanish. But the impulse to return, rebuild, remember, and begin again remains one of the most durable human traits. In the ancient valley, that impulse first becomes visible in stone, grain, bone, and water. The first settled humans are gone, but the world they helped open has never closed. After all the stone springs, skulls, grain houses, animals, and vanished hands, the valley grows quiet again. The first settled humans return to the darkness from which archaeology slowly lifts them, not as complete portraits, but as traces. A flaw, a blade, a burial, a seed burned black by accident and preserved by time. Their world has no written witness, no carved king list, no monument explaining what they believed they were doing. Yet something of them remains in the deepest habits of human life. They are there whenever a home is repaired instead of abandoned. They are there whenever food is stored against an uncertain season. They are there whenever the dead are given a place that the living continue to visit. They are there whenever people look at a difficult landscape and decide that with enough labour, memory and hope, it might hold them a little longer. The ancient valley did not promise them ease. It offered water, but not without danger. It offered grain, but not without work. It offered animals, but not without hunger and risk. It offered settlement, but not without disease, conflict, and the slow weight of obligation. Still the people stayed left, returned, rebuilt, and remembered. Across generations their choices settled into the ground, until the ground itself became a record of human transformation. They did not stand outside history, watching civilization begin. They lived ordinary lives inside extraordinary change, and the change did not end with them. It moved outward through fields and herds, through villages and roads, through mounds rising layer by layer, through later cities that forgot the names of the first builders but inherited their deepest lesson. Home is not only shelter. It is time made visible. It is labour held in place. It is grief beneath the floor and food kept for tomorrow. It is the fragile belief that the future will return to this same ground. The valley remains altered, but still present, holding its long silence under sundust, stone and water. Somewhere beneath the modern world lies that older landscape, where wild grain bent in the wind, dogs slept near fires, and people began to understand that a place could remember them. The first settled humans disappeared without names, but they left behind the shape of belonging, and in that shape, faint but enduring, the ancient valley still breathes,